All right, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us in another meetup with ADOS Kansas City. If you are here in the chat, we appreciate you giving some time in your Saturday to join us. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please like the page. Please share this information with your family and friends. Please subscribe. Turn on notifications. And also, we are today finishing up our discussion with our first book club series, From Here to Equality, by William Darity and A. Kirsten Mullen has been the subject of this book series so far. We are in the last chapter, and that is where the Black ADOS reparations agenda details are being hashed out. So that will be our discussion today. And as you can see, I am Kira from ADOS. We also have Alvonia, Brian, Deb, Layton, and Chris here today. So stay tuned. We're going to have a really good talk, a really good discussion today. So the first thing in creating a reparations agenda is the details of who it should be for and why. So let's talk about that. So now that we've read all of the book, hopefully, and we know all the details, who qualifies for a Black American reparations agenda? What qualifies them, and do you agree with that or not? All right, anyone want to jump in and answer those questions first?
Well, yeah. I'll jump in. This is Kirsten. I'm sorry I don't have my video on. I'm kind of moving around the house right now. But I believe that the text said something about it being, people who had claimed Black or African American at least 12 years prior to 2019, and to me that makes sense, because I wouldn't want. And because I was thinking earlier when we were talking about this before I had gotten to this point in the book, but I was thinking earlier about what sort of ways when we've seen what's happened with the ADOS Act and how that kind of turned into what we've seen with $5 Indians. I was thinking, like, how can we prevent something like that from taking place with reparations for ADOS? And so, to me, that makes sense. I don't know why 12 years was picked. That was kind of an arbitrary number that wasn't really explained to me, but I think that was a good start. So anyway, that's it.
I just kind of, I understand why they go back 12 years, but, and I don't know, maybe I'm a stickler, and if I am, y'all definitely hold me accountable, but I don't think that's long enough. Like, when we look at the, we look at, like, immigration numbers, like they talk about with the Immigration Act of 1965, at that point, Black immigrants are to the right of the decimal. And so it's like, I think about how many Nigerian, Ghanaian, different types of immigrants that could have perhaps claimed to be Black in, like the early 2000s. And like when I think about the people and I think about the collective, like we said, there's 42 million Black homes, 32 million Black homes for ADOS people. That's the collective that I think about. And for me, it's hard for me to find anybody that can't prove someone in their family was you know, establishing themselves as Black before, let's just say 65 per se. Like, I don't know anybody that can't do that. Even those of us that, like, if I can't, you know, I was born in 65, but like, both of my parents, you know, birth certificates, like, it's all kinds of data that could trace it. And, you know, I try to be specific as possible with this. I mean, granted, I do think it's one of those things that, you know, is definitely to be discussed and it's open for discussion. But one recurring theme I find myself saying a lot when it comes to this agenda is specificity, and like trying to be as specific as possible. Because when I think about the damage incurred in our, you know, in our community, like I said, I guess I push back a lot because I really feel like, look, if you wasn't in them fields, if you wasn't suffering, if, you know, you didn't get hit by redlining and convict leasing and all that, like, wherever you were, you know what I'm saying, you gotta take that up with them. And so it's like, if you come over here, I say, well, the way I look at it, conversations I've had with personal friends that I've had with African immigrants, you know, they elite. And they say, like, as I've heard stuff like, oh, it wasn't like that. My dad was poor. And I have a Nigerian friend. Her mother, like, the child illiteracy rate in Nigeria, I guess at that given time, was like one of the worst in the world. Like, most kids didn't know how to read. Then when you tell me that your mother finished high school in Nigeria, that means she's elite. Like, she's rich because majority of kids don't go to school. So you are elite as much as you don't feel like you are. Where you come from, you're the upper echelon. So no, you can't come over here and receive these benefits when in all actuality, there's a big chance that you actually, or your ancestors, took part in the slave trade. And you benefited from that, and now you coming over here trying to benefit from, you know, the slaves, you know, getting, or former slaves, or descendants of enslaved Americans. Now you're trying to get benefit. And I'll be honest with you guys, I ain't with it, like, at all.
All right. Thank you for sharing that, Layton. Alvonia.
Yeah, what I comprehended was dual, how you identify yourself and your lineage. There are people who do have the ADOS lineage, but don't identify themselves as Black, Negro, or African American. Because an immigrant, you know, someone that was born in Africa and migrated, you know, to the United States and became a U.S. citizen could be technically could be classified as an African American. And then we also see Obama as well as Kamala Harris following under that moniker. But again, Darity is specific with the lineage and how you identify yourself on the census, going back 12 years. That's all I have.
Did he specify why 12 years?
That's what I was about to ask.
It was 12 years was not specified. I'm looking now. It was not specified in the book. However, I do agree that it should be for longer, but then it's like I'm not quite exactly sure how that would work, because I know if you're under the age of 12, then what? Right, then what?
Well, see,
because I know that for ADOS, the effects of being ADOS start at birth.
Yeah.
So I'm not. I agree that the definition of having to identify as Black American, African American on the census should qualify, but but also, I don't know, in other instances too, where a person might write Black American on the census, but then they're writing white on it, pensions and loans. So I don't know. I agree that the requirements should be as difficult to infiltrate as possible. I'll say that. Like, no one should be able to just come into this country today and then it happens to take us, 15 years to get reparations, and then they think, oh, we see what's going on now, so let me switch it up on the census. I'm Black now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's kind of why I think about, like I said, when we look at the targeted group, and if the goal is to repair if the goal is to repair the cost that we pay, the we part is how, like when we talk about being as specific as possible. And I don't believe, 12 years is enough, because like I said, we could all prove that we were calling each other Black, or that, we self-identified as Black or African American 12 years ago. But so can Obama, so can Kamala. So as far as I'm concerned, that ain't supposed to work, because you're not suffering how we suffering or why, for the same reason. So we have to be more specific. Me personally, I'm not aware of how more to specifically identify our group than going back to 1965.
So maybe that should be the criteria. What race did you identify with at birth? What race did your parents say you were at birth?
Or more so, you got to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alvin.
Yeah.
The identification focuses on the documents, your birth certificate, your driver's license. That's what they mean, how you identify on those U.S. issued documents. Mm-hmm. How you self-identify African American or Black, like what's on your birth certificate or your driver's license. That's what they mean, how you identify. And then the lineage comes in if you can trace your ancestors back to that 1870 census. 18. Yeah.
So this is a question I guess I got. If and I'll use Barack or Kamala as an example, which I'm not sure about Kamala, but I'm pretty sure.
Well, as far as Kamala is concerned, from my understanding, her mother's birth certificate identifies as Caucasian.
Her mother identified as that, or she did?
Her mother's. Yeah. Yes, those immigrants, the top tier Indian, they identify as Caucasian on their birth certificate.
Well, in that, because that's what I'm thinking about. So Kamala was born in the 60s, correct?
I believe so.
Yes. So that's all with the research that I have on her, that her mom identifies as Caucasian. That was, as a matter of fact, and ADOS posted a copy of that. How her mom identifies as Caucasian. Yeah, I'm getting all this information from ADOS.
I was gonna say, I think it's there's a document of either, and this is her mother, Kamala Harris's mother, either with her immigration document or her wedding certificate, something along those lines, where it's listed, or she listed that she's Caucasian. Okay, so it looks. So what's the consensus on that part? That perhaps how could that requirement of us to have how could the requirement for us to identify as Black American be constructed in such a way that is only for us?
I think we have to go back. I think we have to go back to the 60s because if I say, like, you take somebody like me, I can identify that, or I can prove that I identify as black through driver's licenses, forms or whatever. But I also feel as though, like, if there was the Kamala of my generation, she could do the same. But like, we're two totally different histories. So I feel like we have to make it lineage based. It can't be personal because we're repairing the damage from something that happened to a particular group of people at a particular group in time, at a particular point in time. And so, because I'm a descendant of a slave person, I can prove that because I can prove that before 1965, 89% of all black people in America were descendants of slaves, and I come from it. And I can prove that by, bringing up my grandmother's birth certificate or my grandfather's birth certificate. And it's really not hard to do. Because like my mother's born in 61. You know what I'm saying? I'm 32. So my mother and my father were both born in the 60s and both identified as black. So it's like I can do that, and I don't know anybody aside from maybe mine that can't prove that in this group. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's something that's fairly easy to do. And it's specific enough to where it's essentially foolproof. Because like I said, before the Immigration Act of 1965, the black immigrants in America is less than 1%. And hell, if you was calling yourself black and you in that less than 1%, I personally am okay with you getting reparations. Personally. Cause like, damn, like it's hard to call yourself black back then. And that's what you was choosing to do. Go ahead, my brother. That I ain't got no problem with that personally.
Say that last part again. I'm sorry, I missed it. The very last part.
So like back in before 1965, the black immigrant population in America was less than 1%. So there's a 99.9% chance if you was calling yourself black, you were the descendant of an American slave. And so if you were in that other group, that decimal percentage, but you were still calling yourself black, I personally am not going to push back against that person receiving reparations. Because it's like, that was 1,000. Like, take Kamala Harris's mother, for instance. She could have identified as black, being an Indian American, but she chose to identify as Caucasian because that was better for her. And, from what I read, it was a lot better for her to identify as a Caucasian American. So if you're choosing to take the low road or, identify black when the time where it's, basically asinine to identify that way, I'm okay with you receiving reparative justice because I know that if you was black in the 60s, you was getting it. This is when our civil rights movements and stuff come about.
What about my family in Liberia that went back with Marcus Garvey and the descendants from that? Do you think they should be included? And no, and just from my understanding, race is not listed on our driver's license.
Well, I think one, and I hit the driver's license point first. I think proving how you identify, that's kind of a new term to me. Because like to use something like driver's license or loans or that type of stuff, like that's a way to prove it. But to me, the way I understand it, me proving that I'm black doesn't hold as much weight as proving that I come from of someone that was black in the 60s. Because me being black in my generation, I don't experience the same things as someone else. But there are other black people. Like I know I have a Nigerian friend. We grew up together. We were in the same class for like 7 years. He's just as black as I am on paper. But her lineage, her parents got here right before she was born. But based on how we're wording this, she would be able to receive reparations just like I would. But it's not for her because it's more so about who I come from than how I identify. Like Rachel Dolezal, if she was born in the 60s, she would get reparations, depending on when she started saying she was black. Like if Rachel Dolezal said she was black from birth to now, she would get it, technically.
But by your own admission, there are still people that 1% descendants that can shoehorn their way in on the discussion of reparations. And like I said, I have family members that went to Liberia. And I don't think they should be included. They went to Liberia with Marcus Garvey. And some of them are here in Americas and some of them are still in Liberia.
So your Liberian family, they're from America, like they come from slaves?
Yeah, they came from slavery, but they went back to Liberia.
So to me, the line that I would draw there, I don't believe they should get reparations if they're currently in Liberia.
I don't either, but I'm just trying to see if I'm just trying to figure out where you coming from, because I don't think they're entitled to reparations either.
Well, I don't think they should entitle, my bad, Brian. I don't think they should get it because they're not American at this point. They're Liberian. Now, if they come back
Right.
if they come back to America and they say, look, my grandma was from here, I left because it was crazy. Then what? Go ahead. I ain't tripping.
All right, go ahead, Brian.
Your train of thought, that's all. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Deb. All right, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, this is a great conversation, because that second piece is so, it's like Chris said it from the outset, the number itself is arbitrary and the notion isn't really well articulated in the book. Like, he spends 4 paragraphs. He lists the 2 criteria on page 258 and then spends 4 paragraphs on the first criteria and then one, fairly small paragraph on the second criteria. And it seems to me that there are two different aspects of that second criteria. The one being, of course, like, do you self-identify as a participant in the Black American community? And then the other with the notion of having a government-issued document, and this goes to the Liberia circumstance that Deb just mentioned. Are you currently participating in the American experience? Like, you have a lineage of American enslavement, but you're not currently participating in it. And the not hypotheticals, but like Obama and Kamala, their histories. But then, so one of the hypotheticals I wanted to throw out is how do you all feel about someone who has a white parent and a Black parent, like straight mixed race, who identifies as mixed race, but on their Black side, their Black lineage goes directly back to enslavement? So how do y'all feel about that?
They qualify. Oh, sorry. They qualify. They have to be able to trace a descendant back to slavery. That's the qualification, and that's where the census is going to come in. If you can trace an ancestor back to slavery, you qualify, and how you identify, and they qualify. Mixed race qualify. If the parent is an ADOS, they should not be excluded.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I didn't. The reason I brought it up is just that I got to be super lawyerly on this, which is that he doesn't actually list mixed race as a qualifier. So I'm like, okay, did he not list it because he wanted it to be excluded, or was just maybe an oversight? Or, it very specifically lists Black, Negro, Afro-American, or African-American, but not mixed race. And I'm like,
he mentions an ancestor. Ancestors, as long as you got an ancestor, you qualify.
I think they have an ancestor. Both, right? I thought he said.
No, he said an ancestor. As long as you have an ancestor, you qualify.
Or you're talking about both criteria. Like, you have to have an ancestor and identify. Is that
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
For me, I kind of feel like, and just purely my opinion, if you're a mixed race, I feel like at best you would get half. Like, for instance, both of my parents are ADOS. I don't feel like a mixed race person should get the same benefits that I get, because you can, like, Obama is a perfect example. He accessed whiteness. You was raised by your white mother. You received the benefits from your white grandmother and that $500,000 that she got after she died. And because you identified, like, because when you say identify as mixed race, the way I understand that in real world, You have black mixed people, you got white mixed people. I personally don't think white mixed people should get reparations, in my opinion, because they identify over there. And
Layton, I'm gonna jump in because the criteria, I believe, it doesn't say this in the book, but I believe that the criteria for having to identify as Black American is because that is a signing on to the effects of what it is to be Black American. You know, that labeling is an instant stigma to the racial oppression that has occurred for centuries against Black Americans. For a biracial person, that stigma could come from being born to a Black ADOS mother or a Black ADOS father. But if they don't identify as Black, they don't have the experience, so therefore they wouldn't qualify because they're not oppressed. They don't deal with housing discrimination. They don't deal with workplace discrimination. They don't, that's not their lived experience in America. It is, and that is only ascribed to Black America. So you have the qualifications of an ancestor who was enslaved and identifying as Black American for that reason. Now, you can be biracial and identify as Black American if you have a ADOS parent, Black ADOS parent. I don't think, in the book, it also doesn't say that there's a division of how much a person would get based off of if they're fully Black or half Black or a quarter Black. I think that's diving into controversial territory. Throughout the book, it says, or in this chapter, it says across the board that there's a certain amount that each person who identifies as Black American, all in the book it says 40 million. There are 40 million Black Americans who would qualify, and then there's an amount that each would get based on certain calculations. So a biracial person who identifies as Black American would qualify for the full, whatever amount is determined, would fully qualify for that full amount.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alvelnia.
For me, my question comes in, how can we disqualify mixed race individuals? Because society assigns race. I don't think that self-identification really matters when it comes to, I'm not mixed, but I just think that they too, having an ADOS parent, more than likely in society would be looked at as Black, even though they, are being raised by, a white family. You know what I mean? How can they get around, race in America? I just don't think that they should be excluded. I think that they suffer, just as much discrimination as, other Black people. And that's just my opinion. I just don't think they should be excluded because one parent is white. I don't think, we need to be more open-minded than that, no. You know, they have their own set of, discriminatory practices that's thrown at them. And I don't think we're being open-minded enough when it comes to mixed race kids. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say we have to remember that the plight of being Black American is not ascribed just because of a person's skin color. It's ascribed because of their racial identification. So even with a biracial person who has one white parent, and this is just I mean, there's all sorts of combinations of being biracial, but for this example, let's say you have one white parent and one Black parent, one Black ADOS parent. That Black ADOS parent still has to live through the effects of systemic racism in this country. And those effects are inherently passed down to that child.
So, something I was going to speak on when you were speaking, the caveat. Well, let me say this first. I don't feel that mixed race, I don't feel that people that identify as mixed race or that are mixed race, I don't feel that they should be excluded. I just don't feel that they should get the same benefits as someone who's, ADOS on both sides. Now, how we go about that going forward is definitely a discussion. But a caveat I do want to speak on, two of them actually. We don't know how many of us that we come from two ADOS parents. There's a very high likelihood somebody in our lineage was white, based on American history. So even we could technically be considered mixed race in all actuality. If we're talking about biology, if we're talking about genes, we're talking about over a 400-year period. At some point, it was probably some slave masters cutting up. So I think, like I said, I definitely feel like they should be included. But something that I think about is how many mixed race Americans that identify as white, despite having a ADOS, person in their lineage. Like I think Barack's a perfect example. He was able to access whiteness and move in white spaces and be accepted in white spaces. But understand, based on how we're wording this, he can still come back and access reparations. While I don't think I would push back on that hard enough to exclude him. That's something that I don't like and I'm very uncomfortable with, because you made a choice on who you wanted to be and it wasn't us. So don't jump back with us now that we got reparations going and you can be, you're grifting. You just going to whatever's going at the time. You use your Black side to get the minority scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. But then when it comes time for you to do for minority and Black people, you have no idea who we are. So now when it comes time, because a good rubric that I like to use is with the Indians and how they got their benefits for their reservations and their casinos and their tax breaks. You had to be X amount of Indian. Like you had to be like 5/8 or something. They put a real specific stipulation on what qualifies you as a Seminole, what qualifies you as Choctaw, or the other 5 civilized tribes. They were very specific to the point where, and my great grandmother was full-blood Choctaw Indian. But I read these reports where there were these groups of Black Indians that were trying to apply for their tax benefits and all because they were Indian. But the Indian tribe was like, no, you Black or you don't qualify for this reason or that reason. And they clearly excluded us. This is kind of what we were speaking about earlier with the ADOS Act. So I feel that we should be just as specific, if not more specific, because nobody ever wanted to identify as Black in this country from the beginning of the time that it happened until it came to civil rights era and these different types of policies that were supposed to help us. So I think we should be very critical of those people that try to grift onto what we're doing because it's not beneficial.
I agree, but I think there's that's why the distinction is made between white ADOS and Black ADOS, because part of our history is that it's not a question of if it's a question, it's a guarantee that being ADOS means that you do have white European ancestry in your DNA. You so then you have those who were raped by their slave masters or any other white supremacist terrorist in those times who got pregnant and had a baby who looked white, and maybe that person decided, well, I look white, therefore I'm going to try to pass for white. Such a person would not qualify for ADOS, Black ADOS reparations, because their identification is white, even though they do have a lineage of enslaved Black Americans in their history. They are not Black ADOS. They are white. Go ahead, Alvania. You're still muted.
Sorry about that. I just want to point out that the Black codes made reference for mixed race, and it was mulatto. They referenced what to do with the mixed race, and the Black codes, specifically said Negroes, mulattoes. So again, race is determined by society. That's my comment.
Should we operate within those confines when discussing who receives benefits?
No, my point was that society, I hate to say it, it appears as if we're battling pop culture from 400 years ago, the inferiority of Blacks. And again, race is assigned by society. And again, going back to all of us having mixed lineage, again, society did provide a place for mixed race. And it was mulatto, meaning they still, mixed race then, mixed race now. Again, as far as percentage wise, stuff like that. But they are entitled because society did have a place for the mixed race. So meaning, and I'm bringing that up to say meaning, they face discrimination as well because it's in the, the founding fathers, it's in their philosophy. So that's the comment I have.
All right, so before we move on, I just want us to have a clear understanding of what the qualifications are based off of what is in the book. I know it seems like perhaps the criteria isn't defined enough. We're still having this debate about it. So maybe it does need to be redetermined so that it is crystal clear that reparations goes to ADOS, Black ADOS, and that based on the time frame of how long a person identifies, or maybe even when a person identifies. So it's not just looking back at the census to see, okay, they've had 10 years, or I guess if you do 12, it would be 2 cycles of identifying as Black American on the census. Maybe it should be, you know, what did the person how was a person identified as at birth? You know, this person was born, and their parents, who already had their racial identity set, determined this child was this or that. And in our case, if you have two parents, it doesn't matter if they're biracial. At this one, it doesn't matter if they are biracial. If we have two parents and at least one of them is Black ADOS, and they assign that same racial identity to their child, then I think that should also qualify a person, because then they are at birth set as the bottom caste, or placed in the bottom caste that a Black America is and has been. So then you would be looking at their birth certificate instead of just the census.
So is it more? Well, never mind. I asked that question a while ago. Never mind.
So
then that just kind of goes along with what Ms. Alvania was saying, that, you know, race is determined by society. If we're going by, okay, all right, cool, all right.
I do want to point out.
in that case, the immediate society would be your parents, the ones who helped you into this world, and they said,
Sure.
You are Black American.
Mm-hmm.
We are placing you in this bottom caste.
Gotcha. So is it caste based? And I guess what I'm asking by that is, so because someone has chosen or elected to place themselves within the group that will receive the least term, you know, in terms of, I guess, government representation, benefit of the doubt, all of that good stuff. So because the person has chosen that is I guess because they chose the wrong team, or the bad team, I guess, for lack of a bad way of putting it, that means that they get
the bottom team, the last one picked.
Okay. I don't know. That's kind of a slippery slope.
Well, no, I kind of see where you're going with that, because then you have grifters like the Rachel Dolezals, like the Jessica Crooks, like
No, I wouldn't even go that route.
Not even okay.
No. I would be more so, but like, so, you know, kind of to what Layton was talking about a little bit, you know, when, you know, you have, you know, African immigrants who come over, you know, in the early 50s and 60s, they had to, I mean, I've seen, you know, testimony of some, you know, Egyptians especially, they had to call themselves white, even if they were, you know, as dark as me. They had to put on there they were white. You know, people from different countries, you know, Africans or African descendant people would come to America, you know, and put on their citizenship card or whatever, that they are that they're Caucasian. And so if their lineage, and, you know, they end up getting with, well, I'm just saying, if the society was saying that that's what they had to do, I could imagine that there being the point where, you know, if they were Black people and they were allowed to join into the census or whatever, who wouldn't put themselves down as white? You know, I mean, and if that's the case, then, you know, so are they precluded then, even though they're as dark as me and they put down that they were Caucasian? I'm just saying that I could imagine that being something that could have actually taken place.
Oh, all right. I ain't gonna cut you off, Chris. 2 points I want to make. One, So based on the research that, you know, like Al speaks about all the time, the research we get from ADOS people, no, there were no black immigrants before 1965. So after 65, you don't see a major influx of black immigrants until the mid-80s. This is when you start to get a major influx of African immigrants and what I call black immigrants into the country. Now, that's the facts. Now, my opinion is that if you came over here and you, like you said, like say your H-1B visa or whatever type of green card or whatever you got to become an American citizen, if you had to identify as white, and then you didn't take place in what I would call like the civil rights movements or the movements for black people, I feel like you shouldn't get included. Because yes, you are melanated, yes, you are descendant of Africa, but why not? Reparations isn't for descendants, reparations is only for people that have been enslaved in America from 16.
Hold on, Chris, I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Oh, I'm sorry, my dog's moving around. Sorry about that. I'll mute myself.
Okay, like I was saying, so you have most of your black immigrants are coming into the country between the 70s and the 80s. This is when you get the large influx. So my opinion, and like I said, that's the facts. My opinion is that if you come to the country and you had to identify as white, but you didn't take part in Black America, and I feel like we can look at our own communities to see that. Like I'm from Louisiana. I'm in a really small place in Louisiana. I don't ever remember seeing no Africans or no Dominicans or no other black immigrants that took part in our freedom struggle. Like I don't remember seeing none of that. And so I feel like if you went about that type of time, you got to go to be where you at, because that's what's good for you. Because ultimately we're trying to repair the damage from 1619 to the present. And the huge group of that, like I said, was calling themselves black before 1960. Now, do I think that all black peoples are oppressed and mistreated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I very much believe that. But in return, you chose to come here. You came here for this shit. Like, you knew they was fucking over us, and you came over here to be a part of getting fucked over. That's your choice. We have to realize we are the only people in America that didn't choose to come here. It was the Native Americans that was here, and everybody else came here to take advantage of the oppression of us. So if you chose to come here, that's your choice. Now, if there's a piece of legislation or a piece of policy that fights the oppression and that fights the incarceration and all of that for black peoples from, let's say, 1980 to the present, well, that's fine, but that's not reparations. Like, that's not what I'm here for personally. I'm not here to fight for the oppression of what happened between 1980 and the present. I have a 400-year debt that I'm trying to get paid off for me and mine. And that's who we should target. And I think we should be very vigilant in carving out the people that don't fit that mold.
All right, Ms. Livonia.
Yeah, my comment is immigrants don't qualify. The claim is not all inclusive. The lineage, you have to be able to trace a family member back to, I think, the 1860 census. And they secondly don't qualify because of self-identification. Of course, they didn't have identify as Negro, because I think that was the term we were used, you know, prior to what I think Black came into existence. We became Black in somewhere around the early 70s, late 60s, but immigrants don't qualify. The claim itself is for slavery, Jim Crow, and then the systemic racism faced in education, you know, and education, economically, stuff like that, how we've been disadvantaged, but the claim itself is not all inclusive, and everyone's not gonna qualify. And that's what the main topic for the criteria to qualify for the claim. The claim, everyone's not entitled to the money, and that's why. Let me reiterate. That's why I can't get over the big thing with that. What's that? In Cobra and what's that? NARC, the other organizations. That's why I can't understand the big back and forth when the claim is not all inclusive, because they weren't here. Anybody that was here, 1800s, you were a slave. So it's beyond me. The claim is not all inclusive, and that's all I have.
Basically, what I saw.
Oh, hold on, Nathan. I'm gonna say part of the reason why other groups of Black immigrants don't identify as Black American, or they were forced to identify as white on the census, is because that is distinguishing them from Black Americans as designed by the US government. It is saying that you are not a part of our former chattel slave class, So even though an Egyptian can be as dark or darker, it doesn't matter. They did not come here in chains. And the reason why the American government makes them make that distinction is because we, Black America, is to be kept as a bottom caste, with a new immigrant class being placed on top of us. That's why. It doesn't, and something else I also really want to touch on here is like, it doesn't matter that the person's skin color may be dark as or darker. It would be a really cruel type of colorism to make someone determine their qualifications based on how dark or they are. You know what I mean? Because then we'd be forcing people to do the brown paper bag test to get reparations. And I just think that would be so awful. And that's just my personal opinion. But it still rings true that you can't base qualifications on skin color. It's by racial identity.
Something I wanted to speak on earlier, Al, when you was talking about In Cobra and NARC. So I'm pretty sure In Cobra is the, and I'm not sure the difference in the two, or like which is for which, but I know one is for, basically it's a group that fights for the rights of the people in the Caribbean, because they are formerly enslaved people as well, which I don't feel that they shouldn't receive reparations. But I very much believe that you need to give reparations for the Bahamas, because that's who enslaved you. Like, because we have to keep in mind, a big part of our claim is that because we have somebody to get this money from, i.e. the U.S. government, this is who we're holding responsible for our oppression over these 400 years. As a descendant of a Caribbean slave, you have to go to who enslaved you. But what I'm starting to see, or how I understand it at least, they're trying to bind themselves. They're grifting as well. They're trying to grift onto the American slaves because we have the biggest claim. Like, I don't know that they would be able to get the type of resources from their, individual country that we would be able to get from America. But that's due to that country's success. And I think that's one of the bigger reasons why ADOS we have such a big claim, is because America is the most powerful country in the world. And the main reason, in my opinion, that America does have the power that it has is due to the oppression of our people. We made everything for free for 400 years. So now we're saying, okay, everybody's rich now. Pay me what you owe me, because we built this. And, to those people in the sentence, because I've gotten in a couple, conversations, little harsh disagreements with Caribbean immigrants, because they feel just a part of this as we do. Because they say, well, we were enslaved too. And I'm like, no, I believe you. So take the rubric and go take that shit back over there and go talk to your government about giving you what you need and what you deserve. That fight isn't with my government. Because if it was, then you could prove that your ancestors was here for 400 years just as easily as I could. Because it's not even hard for most people I know to prove that, you know, they have a parent that was calling themselves black in the 60s. And I think we do have to be, you know, like I said again, I said and I keep saying, we do have to be vigilant in who we're talking about. Because understand, we can never repair ourselves by including people that weren't oppressed the same way we were. Here, and here is a very important part of it, because I do believe that those people were enslaved. I do consider them cousins, I guess, if that's how you want to look at it. But you got to go to your mama house and clean up. I'm trying to clean up my mama house.
I want to read something that was shared from whoever manages the social media account for NCOBRA on Twitter. And in this, I hope we all realize well why it is critically important to identify with the reparations agenda that ADOS is trying to get passed versus one that's might be championed by NCOBRA or NARC. And let me see if I can share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see what I see. Okay, can you see this tweet from National NCOBRA?
No.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, great. So I'll just read this, and it says, and this is from NCOBRA, like I said, this law professor explained how the acronym ADOS lacks humanity and lawfulness, which is why it didn't appear on AB 3121. So some are so emotionally attached that no amount of data will make a difference, but some value data analysis over emotions. So here is what they were referring to, and I will read that as well. Let me know if you can see this page that says race, racism, and the law. Can you see that page?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so the social media person from NCOBRA tweeted this rebuttal against Antonio Moore and Yvette Carnell, and here they mention ADOS versus ADOS. And it says, thanks to attorney Antonio Moore and Ms. Yvette Carnell for encouraging the discourse on the subject of reparations, I'm assuming. It's, hold on, let me see if I can see. Did it say who wrote it? I'm not sure who wrote it. Attorney, or the person who wrote it is Ari Meretazan. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Okay, so thanks to attorney Antonio Moore and Ms. Yvette Carnell for encouraging the discourse on the subject. I acknowledge, appreciate, and respect their contribution to the reparations movement in the United States. If I understand their presentation and contribution correctly, in respect to American descendants of slavery, I share the following for further discussion and collaboration. 1, our socioeconomic political data don't trump our peoplehood. Not quite sure what that means. Or 2, it is our peoplehood that identifies us in the first instance, context, and legacy in the USA. 3, other descendants of Africans enslaved in the US and I submit the due order of our identity starts with our origin, who we are, what happened to us, and where. 4, We can set forth irrefutable evidence that our ancestors are African. Europeans declared war on our ancestors. The vestiges of that war continue. 5, in this way, they uprooted our peoplehood, and it gives an example of Roots, the movie. And we should still be in agreement, in general agreement thus far. And aside from them saying our ancestors are African, I personally believe that once our African ancestors, or we didn't even know if it was our specific ancestors, but once we were sold away from African soil, forced into America, our ancestors became American. They were brought to the land which would eventually become America. Therefore, they are American ancestors. That's the only point there. Okay, so point 6. The start of our legacy in America is documented by our enslavers as of 1619. From the 1600s to the present day, our father's father's father and our mother's mother's mother were prisoners of chattel slavery. 7, their descendants, us Black people, are enslaved by the Black Codes, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, racial discrimination, affirmative action, and other actions and behaviors that obfuscate who we are. Okay, so right here at point number 7, we need to realize what has been taken out of the qualification, and that is being a descendant of enslaved Americans who were first into chattel slavery. Here we have listed that they were enslaved by Black Codes, Jim Crow, mass incarceration.
Oh, no.
Yes, no, that's right. No, so hold on. Let me keep going. There's a few more points. I'll be quick. Withstanding all, the point 8, withstanding all that, we are legally and factually DAEUS. 9, therefore, wherever Africans were enslaved, we are still their descendants of Africans, no matter where they were enslaved. So this is again more of a beginning criteria for a global reparations agenda versus.
And that's a lie. That's a lie there, Kiara. Show me they global Michael Jackson. Show me they global Wilma Rudolph.
Well, hold on. Let's keep going. There's a few more points. 10, to demonstrate this, in closing, I want you to think deep and then rethink your concept of American descendants of slavery within the context of our ancestors. You should arrive at our agency status and standing as built-in identifiers and unifiers within the African diaspora. 11, it follows that we are descendants of Africans enslaved in Brazil, in the Caribbean, in Great Britain, and throughout the colonized world. Finally, as I've shown,
that is a lie.
Of Africans enslaved in the United States. 12, I said Ari something earlier. It was actually Professor Vernelia Randall. She wrote it. So she says, and I are low key and don't cast our pearls amongst swine. Good Lord. We consider Antonio Moore and Yvette Cornell as partners in the repair of our peoplehood, of the repair of the African diaspora, is what she's saying. And simultaneously, all of our other injury areas broadly and specifically speaking, economics, education, health, political prisoners, mass incarceration. 13, we welcome an invitation for further discussion. So
I got a comment.
This was shared by NCOBRA, an attempt by whoever wrote this article, Professor Randall, to take away the qualifier of being enslaved in America.
That's crazy.
by basically saying no, we were enslaved all over, and we should all join the global movement for reparations. And it's not right that you only identify as American within that movement. And
They got their reparations coming here.
hold on, let
They
me
got their
stop
reparations when they immigrated here.
sharing.
They got their reparations
Right.
when they immigrated here. And
So
out of
that's
all of the
right.
diaspora, show me their Michael Jackson. Show me their Wilma Rudolph. I mean, just show me. The diaspora is not global. We are. And that came from pain. That ain't nothing but pain. So as a social worker, I already know. I mean, they don't have a claim, and they are shoehorning onto ours. They came here to an intact economy and an intact country.
I mean,
We are the ones that are habitually abused and continue to be, despite our education. So no, they are not included. None of the Americas, only us. As far as I'm concerned.
I have my comment is when I Google Daz, it's a name like Chris, like Kiara, that's the meaning of Daz. They have it listed as a first name. And then it even says the name means descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States, but it's coming up as a first name. That's one thing I noticed about these other organizations. They just make up names and meanings and just put it into one and put it in a document and dress it up all nice, but it doesn't make sense. I'm done.
Go ahead, Layton.
Okay, so a couple things. I want to make it short because I feel like I'll be long-winded as hell. One, you have to understand that, like one of the lines I love, Jamie Foxx says in what is the name of that movie? Law-abiding citizen. So he makes a statement where he says, "It's not what happened; it's what you can prove in court." And so, while I do understand that, I believe in the African diaspora. I believe that Africans, left one place and went everywhere. But I think the issue here is we're not trying to diminish or diminish like what's happening in these different places, whether it be Brazil or the Caribbean. We know slavery take place in a bunch of places. That's not what we're here to repair. We're here to repair American slavery because we can prove that. I can't make a case for immigrants. I can't make a case for Caribbeans. I can't make a case for Brazil. I didn't go real down on the laws there. I can't prove that for all of those people. And we never set forth to prove it for all of those people. Because like Deb was saying earlier, you came here to take part in what we built. America is America because we built it. So you get certain citizenship rights, and if we're going to be all honest, you get a whole lot of shit in America you can't get nowhere else for free. But the whole for free part is we pay for that. So no, it has nothing to do with, like when we talk about differentiating, we're differentiating because you don't have a claim. Like, I'm not saying that you don't deserve reparations, but you don't get it from America because you weren't here. Like we just talked about, immigrants didn't get here until the mid-'80s. Like that, so we ain't fixing that part. We fixing 1619, well, not even 1619, because America wasn't even a country at that point. You know what I'm saying? America doesn't become a country until 150 years later. So we're going from 1776 to the present, understanding that 150 years before America becomes a country, slavery is a 150-year-old institution already, and then continues to be 120, 30 years of an institution in the first half of American history. And then we get to what they listed in the document, the black codes, the peonage, the convict league. But we looking at 300 years of chattel slavery and then all that bullshit. And then saying, look, that happened to us too. But that's not the bulk of what we're talking about. Because the bulk of the wealth that we would be receiving back from America happened from 1619 until 1863, or 1900, depending on how you understand your facts. And so my issue with them, like Derek was saying, they're grifting. Like, they talk about globalism, but we're not. I'm not against what they're saying in terms of us coming together to make a case, but I do feel as though that case is easier made after the richest country in the world. After America pays ADOS, I think we have a better chance to get that global reparations thing popping, because now we've defeated the strongest country out there, and it should just trickle down. Because in my opinion, once we receive reparations in America and we get that up and rolling, I think we should appeal to Great Britain. We should appeal to France, just as well as people in certain African countries, like with Belgium. I think it's Belgium and the Congo. Like, they enslaved those people. They colonized those places. They should appeal to those countries to get those resources because they were stripped of it. But like, I'm a big advocate of you sweep around your own front door before you sweep around somebody else's. That's how I feel.
But make no mistake about it, that's the way the government designed it. The government designed it that way. We are global people, period.
I feel like, so to what extent does that go? I mean, because then there are those who have been enslaved by Saudi Arabia. There are those, the Indians who were enslaved by Great Britain. I mean, what about
They
them?
should make their claim with them.
Yeah, so I get that and I feel that, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like this is such a broad sentiment that it almost makes it insurmountable.
But Chris, remember, they want the waters muddy. The muddier the waters, the harder it is to peel back the layers.
Oh, I see. See, I'm not really that familiar with this group or what they're about.
Oh, I'm not either. I just got familiar with it since I've been following ADOS. But just from reading their webpage, they are not engaged with us. They're practically anonymous. And they don't have as many followers as we do as individuals. They are simply here to muddy the waters towards ADOS's claim. Just period, point blank. And what they're doing, because it's just their network that's constantly attacking us from my perspective. Like the one gentleman that wrote the article yesterday that had got redacted or something happened with it. That was specifically something that Jam put into motion. But I saw Jam on Be the Powers video. She's not that sharp to be a PhD. I probably could have debated her and won. She's not that knowledgeable. She just has a lot of letters behind her name. And I stand by my comment. She is not that smart. She was not able to engage with those young men. She wasn't clear. Her goal was to attack ADOS, and she didn't do a very good job.
Yeah, I think they're grifters. Like, I feel like, and I think there's a lot of people out there, and this is
hold on, Layton. I think Brian was next.
Oh, I didn't see it. My bad.
No, you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying, and I'll make it quick. And that's one reason why, we talk about being inclusive. Something I think we got to be real sharp on, because I know those, different people within the African diaspora, they understand by connecting themselves to ADOS, it betters their lives. In the same way that they understood disassociating from ADOS bettered their lives. So essentially, when we talk about, because I agree with you that race is a societal construct. I'm not saying, I personally think we should operate in that lane. So society said that ADOS was the bottom class. Society said ADOS was going to hold on to the Fed. Society says, American society says, we're going to be great by destroying these group of people. And so what I'm saying is, since that's what society said, everybody that didn't want us from the entire American history, leave us in this box. Don't try to come in this box now, because now we finna get back what we're owed. And now you're trying to jump on the bandwagon to get the resources. And me personally, I ain't with it. You didn't suffer. Your grandmama, you ain't had them talks on the porch. You know what I'm saying? You wasn't shelling them peas on Friday nights all night long. So you don't get to get in here and get the good stuff once we get it wrong. I think we gotta, you know what I'm saying? We should keep those constructs, and we have to be very, you know, very specific about who we're talking about, because I very much believe that they are grifting and they are trying to use us to benefit as they've always done.
So I actually brought that up initially to say that although right now we are still debating over, and maybe it's not, well, yeah, it's kind of a debate over who qualifies for reparations based off of what we've read in the book. We have to be very careful about who we do align with as far as getting a reparations agenda. I know I've been in conversations with people online who have said that they will not associate with ADOS. They are for reparations, they are in support of it, but they align with NCOBRA and NARC. And that's not going to get us a Black American reparations, clearly, right? So I say that to say the only organization, the only movement that is actually fighting for Black American reparations specifically is ADOS. And while it can correctly be said that perhaps we do need more specificity within criteria, that William Darity's alignment with ADOS will get us closer to that than NARC ever will, or NCOBRA ever will. All right, so let's move on to who's going to pay for it. Okay, and I have the digital copy of the book, so, but we can go towards who is going to fund a reparations agenda. And this, when I say reparations agenda, I am including the monetary recompense as well as policies that would elevate us. So that's why I put the two words together, reparations agenda. It's both. It's not just a check. It's not just a dollar amount. It's us also being elevated to a protective class. It's policies and legislation put in place that would protect us from the effects of structural racism. So who pays for that? Alvonia, you can jump in.
You're muted. You're muted, Al.
As noted, the Federal Reserve and maybe even a reparations super fund by institutions, but for the most part, your first part of the question, you mentioned it has to be an act of legislation. First of all, that's foremost. It spoke about how the courts they're not going to have help. They have a history, of not siding for Native Blacks. And secondly, again, I think as far as we are concerned, enact the legislation, and we need to really pressure or find, like we say, find ways or elect people that's gonna follow our form of thinking, opposed to the elected officials we now have, because they're not living up to what they are supposed to do as far as we are being their constituents. But enactive legislation and the Federal Reserve, as well as the super fund, could easily pay for this, because the United States is culpable.
Can I jump in real quick?
You do your thing.
Can I jump in real quick? I'm not sure if Kara is still on.
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a technical point about money creation. I would argue not to fund it through the Federal Reserve and just print that money straight up through the federal government, because you go through the Federal Reserve, it's money that's created via debt through treasury notes, and therefore you have, the government has some claim to, interest on that created money in the future, which nobody wants that at all. But that's a whole other subject, not really related to the discussion. I mean, the major point being that the United States government should fund it itself through the legislature and legislation. Sorry, technical point that's it.
Like Alvon was saying, and I don't know if everyone else knows, but the Federal Reserve is a privately owned institution. Like, that's not an American owned
Exactly. Yeah,
and
exactly.
also, I think, and this is the thing that I like about the conversation. We're not asking America to do nothing it hasn't done multiple times already. Like, we know America's paid reparations multiple times.
Hey, I'm gonna hold on, because I didn't know that. So what would the effects of reparations being paid through the Federal Reserve be? If that's how it was going to be paid?
The federal,
Go ahead.
yeah, the federal, this is a real rabbit hole, but the Federal Reserve is, like Leighton just said, it's essentially a private organization. It has this veneer of as a quasi-public agency, because the head of the Federal Reserve is appointed by the president, at some point, and then approved through the Senate. But it's, I think there are 12 Federal Reserve banks throughout the country, and they're all owned by private banks. And so when basically like the United States government finances its own money creation and federal spending, like domestic and international spending, by telling the Federal Reserve, this is our budget for the year. We need X amount, hundreds of billions of dollars or trillions of dollars. And if the money isn't, like, if the United States isn't running in a surplus, then the Federal Reserve essentially buys treasury notes that are issued by the United States Treasury and takes those treasury notes that yield an interest rate and gives the money that they paid for those treasury notes to the United States government. But the Federal Reserve literally just creates that money like any bank. Like, it's not like the Federal Reserve has its own stash of dollars, US dollars. They literally it's just a computer entry or, an accountancy entry. They just take these treasury notes, and all of a sudden the United States has cash, which is a total scam. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so clearly I was looking at the words reserve and thinking, oh, that's like our city's reserve fund or a state reserve fund, but you're saying no. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
The Fed is as federal as the FedEx.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, that's right, Chris.
Okay. All right. Alvonia and then Leighton. You're muted.
Okay. Well, only thing I wanted to say is Mullen Darity, page 266. The Federal Reserve Bank is a public bank charged with conducting a public responsibility. That's Darity, page 266, about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a public bank charged with conducting a public responsibility. And that's noted on page 266.
Yeah, it's one of my biggest concerns about, and I mentioned this a few conversations ago, that, I mean, there's a great book that you can read called The Creature from Jekyll Island that talks about the creation of the Federal Reserve in roughly 1910 through 1912.
1911.
And I mean, it's derided these days as a conspiracy theory, but in reality, it was the robber barons of the early 20th century, particularly in banking, who said, you know, they were losing out to regional banks. National banks were losing out to regional banks, so they created this organization of federal banks that would backstop the United States government through the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And it has this patina of public, you know, public facing, because the head of the reserve does have to be confirmed by the Senate and nominated by the president. And the private banks that own the various Federal Reserve banks have to return their profits to, yeah, that's it. Yeah, have to return their profits to the Treasury. But it's really only quasi-public at best, because they are owned by private banks. All the Federal Reserve boards on the National Federal Reserve and the regional Federal Reserve boards are all just private, generally private bankers, predominantly white. And so even though they don't take the dividend from, you know, money generated through their regional banks or the National Federal Reserve, they still direct that policy, and it's all directed by National Federal Bank. So it's really only quasi-public. It does have a public face, but it's very much driven by private interest.
All right, Alvonia.
And something else, I know you spoke on the inflation, but to mitigate prospects of excessive inflation, you can distribute portions of reparations payments as less liquid assets. That's all. I'm not versed in banking or anything like that, but it was again covered on page 266. That's all.
I just to jump in real quick, I love that aspect of it. I think that's very smart. And the concern about inflation, I think, is legitimate. Less liquid assets being like, obviously, land, you know, housing, vehicles, you know, I mean, maybe investments, but I don't like that idea, because I don't like the stock market really. But yeah, I think that's really, I mean, diversifying reparations as they're paid out, I think it's really, really smart.
And we also have to understand that at one point, the Federal Reserve, or America's wealth, was backed by gold. There was a gold standard. So all of the money that we printed out, you know, we could back it with gold, but it hasn't been that way for a little while now. I think it's like credit. It's like, so it's credit or something like that. Like
Debt.
On our GDP or what it's based on, but essentially it says America has the potential worth of this, and we base, you know, the amount of cash that we print out and assets that we own is based on the concept that we'll earn this money in a given time.
Yeah, it's debt. Our money is basically a Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
Absolutely. To put numbers to that, domestically, we went off the gold standard in the 30s, and then internationally, Nixon took us off the gold standard in the 70s. Yeah.
Hey, Nixon.
And I remember it caused a lot of inflation as well in the 70s when Nixon did that, because the U.S. government printed a lot of money. People were lining up. That was the first time I remember people lining up for gas.
Yeah.
When Nixon, took us off, the gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just so we're clear about how reparations shouldn't be paid, the effect would be possible or most likely inflation, which would only work against the value of the dollars that we would receive. Gotcha. Okay. Oh, go ahead, Miss Lavonia. Miss Al.
You're muted.
Al, you muted. Wait. All right. Wait. You muted.
You were muted that whole time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said the stimulus payments, they were able to make stimulus payments to all of America, and that in itself, the money came out, you know what I mean? And if they can pull that money out, they can really pull reparations out the same bag they pulled the stimulus money out. I don't know where that money came from.
They just print
But,
money at this point.
again, that's my response to that. They was able to pull this stimulus money out. That's just another. I'm done.
I can never understand how they give all these tax breaks and how CEOs make so much money, but yet they lay themselves off. They can figure out a way to finagle our payments.
Well, remember we talked about that last week. I mean, we still haven't gotten back to answering that question, but we were talking about Amazon and how Jeff Bezos is able to be tax-free. And I think we were talking about how the taxes are passed along to the employees of the corporations. We didn't confirm that, but at this point, it was just a rumor, but something along those lines where they're able to get the taxes from the people who work for them. Yes, Miss Al.
Yeah, taxes are calculated on your earnings. So the rich, as far as salaries, we are taxed the most on wages. That's how, Trump got that huge, tax return, worth millions of dollars.
72
a lot of other, like a lot of others, but as far as taxes, we, the working people, we are taxed, the wages are taxed higher than the investments, the stocks, the bonds. That's how they're able to not pay taxes, because they're not bringing home that much as far as wages. Like $1 billion CEO can only bring home $2 million in taxes, but the rest of the money is in, their liquid assets, so that's how they get around it. And we know the tax system needs to change, needs a huge overhauling. But again, they can find a way if, stop the corporate tax breaks. That's one way they can, finagle the money. That's my comment.
And I think we also have to think about it, you know, or the way I view it at least. When you look back on American history, America was most successful when the middle class made the bulk of the money. Because your middle class is gonna buy up houses, cars, assets, businesses, and they're gonna introduce this money into the economy. What happens when your upper echelon make a lot of the income, they buy yachts and stash money in overseas accounts. And that money isn't thrown back into the economy because the economy is strongest when people are buying and selling and buying and selling and buying and selling. What we have now is something Tone talks about called wealth calcification, where there is no such thing as new money. Like you look at, I think Bezos is a perfect example. Bezos got like a $450,000 loan from his parents and then create Amazon, as well as Mark Zuckerberg, as well as Bill Gates. Like all of these men were already rich before their businesses. And so what we find out is wealth acquires more wealth because you need X amount of dollars to even make money, even in new industries. Like 30 years or so ago, Tom and Yvette did a breakdown on the marijuana industry because it was a new industry. A lot of people were, you know, getting into it trying to make money. And what they find out, like you have to have at least $300,000 to $400,000 worth of working capital just to get into the business. That's not even talking about being successful. So as a, you know, i.e. random ADOS man or woman, there's no way I'm gonna have $400,000 worth of working capital when to be in the top 5% of all Black African Americans in America, you only need to be worth $350,000. So that basically excludes us out the whole picture. And when we find in all these industries, it's the same thing. They need money, a lot of money, to make money. And what we're finding out now is with the you know, top 10%, let's say, making all of the wealth, the new wealth in America, everybody else is struggling because we paying just enough to make it to the first. But what happens is over time, you know, like I think the Uber, what do they call it, the gig economy. I think the gig economy is a perfect example of what happens when your upper echelon makes so much money. Because at that point, you're driving, you know, Uber, Lyft, all these different delivery services to pay your bills. But what you found out is essentially what you're doing is exchanging the wealth in your car for like now. So say you make $1,000 in a month. Well, yeah, that's great. You made a quick little thousand, but you know, your brakes, your tires, your engine, your transmission, all of that, you took out the wealth out of your car. And then if you do this all the time, now you don't have a car and you didn't make enough money to buy another. So now you fucked. And I think that's all of the avenues that we have, i.e. the bottom 80% of America. Like we have to, you know, try to finagle ways to get it. So essentially, I think it's just getting that political education. Because once you understand how the money moves, you understand how you can't get it. And how the only person that can get it are those aberrations, those LeBron James, and Diddy's, Jay-Z's, and Dan Dashes, and all them type people.
Can I jump in on that? I just want to say how much I wholeheartedly agree with everything that everybody said so far, particularly what Leighton just said. I think maybe you mentioned it, Leighton, but also you gotta account for the value of your time investment. Like regardless of your expenditures, like your time is worth however much it is to you, you know. Also, I want to come back to the concept of inflation and Mr. Darity's, you know, attempts to preemptively respond to concerns by people about inflation related to a reparation system. I think it's really important to recognize that there are various different types of inflation. The two most principal and important in this context is asset inflation, like inflation for homes, cars, land, stocks, versus price inflation, like consumer price index inflation. So the value of milk and eggs and, you know, gasoline, et cetera. So I think there are two, like, you know, I think Deb jumped in and made the point about, you know, we've seen like several trillions of dollars printed by the Federal Reserve and then injected directly into the economy to prop up the stock market. Well, that's asset inflation straight up. Like that's why the stock market just more or less continues to keep climbing, because they're sending it straight into the banks. The banks convert that money into loans for big corporations, and the corporations are backstopped by the Federal Reserve, and then ultimately, the United States Treasury. And I think that the concern about inflation as a consequence of a reparations program is way overblown, because consumer price index inflation is not tracking with asset inflation. So if you inject a bunch of money, and this goes to Leighton's point about the middle class and lower classes, if you inject a bunch of money into the middle and lower socioeconomic classes, that's not going to create a ton of inflation, because that money is just going to circulate in the economy. It's going to be saved. It's going to be saved by the middle and lower classes. It's going to be invested in their communities, in their homes. It's going to be invested in, ideally, local companies. We need to walk back all the chain restaurants and chain stores we have and make things more local and regional. But I think that can be a really effective way to combat the fear of inflation as a consequence of a reparations agenda.
Okay. Here, I wanted to make note of the fact that Darity and Mullen say that the U.S. government, as the federal authority, bears the responsibility for sanctioning, maintaining, and enabling slavery, legal segregation, and continued racial inequality. Let me see here. Oh, no. And then it says here that specifically the invoice should go directly to Congress. And then below that it says, as the Supreme Court's school segregation or desegregation decisions demonstrate, legal mandates without broad popular support will be blocked and deflected. If popular support is a prerequisite for success in obtaining Black reparations, then it is best to develop that support and push Congress to vote for a substantive program of Black reparations. So we need Congress, and we need people to push for Congress in order to get it.
Is that discouraging? Because I feel like a lot of pushback out here with that particular statement is Congress will never pass that bill. That's what I hear a lot when we talk about introducing the reparations plan.
I hear that. They say white people will never give us reparations.
And see,
but I think that's not true.
No.
That was
I think we
one
have.
of the. I had a question. That was one of the things that Jam got wrong. She was trying to point out that ADOS language, I guess, what do you call jargon wasn't correct for a court case. And I thought to myself, I know I read from Here to Equality that it couldn't go through the court. All of the cases were dismissed.
Right. He Darity and Mullen say that the judicial branch should be removed from the matter, one, because of lawsuits brought against corporations are unlikely to succeed. Two, we would have to establish that U.S. government agencies knowingly did not enforce the new laws. And three, the courts do not have the capacity to implement or enforce any legal mandate.
Can you repeat that last one?
Mm-hmm. Three, The courts do not have the capacity to implement or enforce any legal mandate that they might hand down for Black American reparations.
So it has to come from Congress. This can't be a court decision. We got to go straight to the big dogs.
Yes.
And that makes sense because I feel like we can prove, because like something I hear Yvette and Tone talk a lot, or Yvette and Tone talk a lot about is citizenship rights. So, you know, as an American citizen, I should be afforded protection, you know, like protection from the KKK and protection from redlining and all that type of stuff. And I think it's very easy to prove that that never happened, even to the current day, between all of the color of laws and from here to equalities and the 10 years to closing the racial wealth gap. Like, I feel like we have a very substantial case to prove that, you know, we as the citizens of American slaves don't even get basic citizenship rights, much less what we're owed due to the debt that America owes us.
Absolutely. And it is our right as American citizens to demand reparations from the government. I mean, if you were keeping up with the hearings this week with Amy Coney Barrett, and she was asked about the rights in the First Amendment, the one that she missed was the right of American citizens to petition the government for redress of specific grievances.
Yeah.
For us, that is our demand for reparations. We have that right. We need to exercise that right. And I think, and just to jump back in again, I think more of us who identify as ADOS need to be explaining to our people, family, and friends that it's our right as people who were born in this country, our ancestors have lived here. We have the right for our government to address our needs. It's not an issue of, oh, well, if they have the money or whenever it's convenient for them, for those who think that we should wait until after the elections. It's like, no, now, like right now, like we use the hashtag reparations now, and that's what that means. Like today, right now, our government should have a Black reparations agenda. So I think we need to just continue pushing the information and get people to be aware of that. Like we're not asking for handouts. The data is there. The evidence has been proven. Black America deserves a reparations agenda. And we need to push them to understand that. We need to push them to share that, and we need to push them to reach out to their congressional reps to get those policies put in place.
And I think that's where informing the people comes in. I advocate for that, and I think we should keep that in mind. The more we educate, ADOS community and Black constituents at large about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that it can be done. And I always like to look like to AB was it 131, 1231? I forget the numbers, but I look at that as an example. Like that was a huge win for us.
AB 3121.
Okay, 3121. That was a huge win. And listening to the woman that actually put that into place, she said she did that in 8 weeks. She wasn't even a legislator. She had an intern. And she talked to, who she was interning with about the legislation. And they got it passed. She said it was like 8 weeks. She was like, she basically just told them everything Tone talked about, and they got that passed. And I think that's a big win for us because it's like, yo, we could do this. We're doing it, actually.
Miss Al?
Yeah, I have a comment about what went on in California. I got a chance to check out a sister by the name of, I think it's Angela Navarro out of South Cali, ADOS, and she said that that bill had actually sat on Governor Newsom's desk for a year, and it was going to dissipate that day. But it was Ice Cube who was that push that got the governor to sign the bill. So again, appreciate you, Ice Cube. I just wanted to throw that in. She worked with, I saw her, and she said she got a lot of information from Antonio Moore, and as well as, but Ice Cube was instrumental in that push with the governor of California. I just wanted to bring that point up. That's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, I think in that, you know, so far in our modern ADOS history, we've been so loyal to the Democratic Party that it's kind of a culture shock to be anything else. And that's where so much pushback from our own people, and that, you know, they're saying like, how could you ever stand with Trump, or how could you align with him? The point is we are not aligning with any party. We are aligning with people who create policies that are for us. We are nonpartisan. We should be nonpartisan anyway. So what Ice Cube did is he that's why I said we've been doing it too. But at the same time, ADOS has really, really come down on what we call the decadent veil. You know, we are really hard on Black celebs, and rightfully so, because up until now, we haven't had too many of anyone of that magnitude within the Black community speaking out, saying, hey, Black America deserves a reparations agenda. I don't care who it comes from. You know, I'm not, so we have to keep that in mind, that when we are saying down ballot, nonpartisan, we have to explain what that means, and we have to explain why. Go ahead, Layton.
I think we got to keep in mind also that, and which I don't know if y'all think about it, so I'm going to get y'all opinion. We looking at rappers, entertainers, comedians, you know what I'm saying, a couple businessmen here and there that are speaking on a 400-year political claim. These people are not educated. I don't think they know half as much as we know about politics. So I think we have to keep that in mind when we hear the T.I.s and the Killer Mike, well, not Killer Mike per se, but the T.I.s and the Ice Cubes and the Jay-Z's, the different celebrities that are speaking on these issues. Half of these people didn't even graduate high school. And that's not to say that they're intellectually deficient, but understand a lot of people can't speak in the space that we speak in. Because when we start talking about policies and you know, the Homestead Act and the New Deal and how workers move, the GI Pacts and, you know, equity in home ownership, they don't know nothing about none of that in terms of the history of America. These are just a couple Black dudes and or women, depending on how you're looking at it, that got rich and they were successful in this oppressive society. So in their minds, they understand things a little different. Now, I do feel like the Ice Cubes and the T.I.s, I very much believe that their hearts are in the right place and they're fighting for the right people. But we also have to understand us pushing our ADOS agenda goes directly against what made them successful. Like, damn rich, voting for Trump is better for a black celebrity. Way more than not voting for him is. And we have to understand that they have to be not self-interested. They have to be more interested in the community and the uplift of the community than the uplift of themselves. And I think majority of them, and maybe rightfully so, aren't willing to risk their fame and their notoriety to advocate for a group like us, because that would mean they might lose some money. You know what I'm saying? And we have to be critical on them on that as well.
Ms. Al?
No, I was just mentioning how California ADOS was saying how instrumental Ice Cube was, and he was a well-needed ally. From my understanding, he did, he spoke with ADOS. I'm just speaking from what I heard. Someone from California ADOS said how instrumental and how we need celebrity, alliances, and that would really help the cause. That's the comment I'm trying to make. Now, if it's a celebrity talking trash, of course, but if it's someone that's trying to push for the greater good, I don't have a problem with it, because we need as many, we really do need help to really, basically, we're up against pop culture that from 400 years ago, and we're trying to change pop culture now. So, that was the comment I have. That's it.
So, so the next question I want to ask is, again, what works? If we need a critical mass, and we say critical mass, but I mean, I'm not even sure what that number is, because we have so many who identify with the ADOS movement, and we might not know they're pushing for it in ways because they're in the shadows. We don't see them. So, but with needing a critical mass, what will it take to get our people online with ADOS? What will it take for us to not have so much of the pushback that Ice Cube has been getting on with associating with ADOS? You have people like Roland Martin who said, we ain't doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But then you got to look at his lineage.
Yeah.
Roland Martin, you got to look at his lineage. He's really a buffoon, but that's exactly who they will elevate to sit in high spaces.
Yes. Well, that comes into the conversation of, he's black, and for so long we associated, black skin with kin, like they say, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. But
And
how
I
do
think
we?
part of the disconnect for the population that I work with every day is, they are just not into the internet, and they probably was more so like me, where you just watch the news and you identified them as black. But ADOS has shown me that, as you just referred to, all skin folks is not kin folks. And now that I'm aware of that, I do watch their jargon.
Yeah, I think we should talk about some things that actually work for us. Like just this week, I'm a preschool teacher, and in case you all didn't know, and the director of the preschool where I work, she came into the break room, and she told me, she's like, "Hey, Kira, guess what?" I was like, "What?" She's like, "Next year we're gonna have Martin Luther King Day off. Like petitioned the I work at a private preschool, so it's within a corporation. She says like, yeah, I reached out to our regional manager and I got the day off for us. I was like, oh, that's great. And I was like, huh. I was like, well, you know another day we should get off too? And she's like, well, I was like, Juneteenth. And so in that moment, I was able to explain to her what Juneteenth was, the history of it, the significance behind it to Black Americans. And so I think we need to look for those moments. We need to not be afraid to have those moments with our people, our friends and family, the people we work with, you know. And it was, and so I'm in that I'm gonna follow up with her and like, hey, you know, we had this conversation, you know, can we get this day off? And also even in that, it's an introduction to what ADOS is and what we're about and why we deserve and why we need support from people who say that they're against racism or that they want to be more diverse and inclusive. Well, what do you mean by that? Or here's what diversity and inclusion can look like when you're including Black Americans. And that's being in support of a reparations agenda. So let's talk about that. What other examples of how our advocacy works? Like what does work for us?
In terms of advocacy, or what do you mean? Um,
Yes.
I'm wondering if this kind of ties into the question you asked earlier about, you know, what's going to get our people to support us.
Yeah, that's kind of where the along, like what works in getting people on board with the ADOS?
I think it's consistency, and I think, you know, as ashamed as I am to say it, we have to be popular. Like, we're not popular right now, and I think the only reason that we're still here is because everything, or 90% of everything that we talk about, we can prove. Because when we have those conversations, when I've had conversations with different people about policy, a lot of times what they say is, well, your facts are right. Your facts are right. Your facts are right. Your facts are right. But we know that. We know it. We know it. Or I didn't know that, but your facts are right. And I think when you come with the solutions, it's kind of never happen. Well, how can you agree with everything I said and then disagree with how to fix it? Because what I see a lot of times is that, like I say, to me, that's scary. Like, I really believe that, because I feel personally like we fall down for reputation. It ain't shit we can't do. We can do it. We want to do it. We just got to do it. But I think a lot of people are scared. I think a lot of people are cowards. I think a lot of people just go with the flow of what's going. Like, if it's like right now, reparations is a popular thing. Like, I remember.
Yeah, I would say that, but I mean, but what does work though? Like, I think in and of itself, sharing the data and having people actually agree and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's you know, the first step. The second step is saying, okay, if you can agree with this, then you should agree with what it takes, what the solutions have to be.
But you don't. If you don't have a political understanding, nothing I'm going to say is going to make sense. Because in your mind, I mean, in my opinion, 90% of our community, I don't think they know shit about politics. Personally speaking, I mean, we vote for people that look like us. You know, we understand that our skin from. You know, the majority of us, you put a black face in front of us, and then you have a white face to the left, and like who you voting for, 90% of us will vote for the right person. It's our GP. And you know, no policy, don't know nothing about their parents or where they come from. We just like, oh, I'm gonna go with him, he black, right? And so I think we're not gonna gain, I think, what we need in order to be at the highest level of success until we make it popular? Because I don't think most people read. Like they read and these people in general, not just black people, they read the headlines, a couple sentences out of a paragraph, and then they claim themselves to be experts. So until we make ADOS popular, until we make the movement cool, I don't think we'll get what we're looking for. Because we have to turn ADOS into basically a Breonna Taylor hashtag. Like, whether people know what the fuck Breonna Taylor, what happened to her or not, they know who Breonna Taylor is. Even if they know nothing about it, they know it was a sister that got shot by the police. That's it. If they know that. So I feel like until we can make it cool, I think that's the best way we'll be able to, receive that advocacy from our community.
How do we do that? I mentioned, examples of you just in everyday moments, in normal everyday moments, you bring it up. You look for those opportunities to talk about ADOS, especially when people are talking about things like Black Lives Matter or inequality or racism. Oh, if you're talking about BLM or racism or inequality, I'm bringing up ADOS for sure. I'm definitely gonna interject us into those conversations. And it's not for me to be like, oh, they didn't like what I had to say. My job is to share the information. I can't control whether or not they accept it. I'm just here to give facts. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks. I think, sorry, I had to jump in and out there for a second to help with some groceries, but I like what I heard of both of what Kiara and Leighton, what you both just said. And I think I would add from my perspective, I think it's a combination of just being strategic with respect to, when to inject it, like recognizing who is going to be receptive, but also being assertive enough to say, this is exactly what I believe, and then have faith that, the people will come to you. And I use myself as an example with respect to you, Kiara. I started following you because of a common interest in local politics, and then saw your handle change, and then your general requests for anybody who's interested. And that's how I came here. And that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been confident enough to say, this is something that's really important to me, put it online, but also it also wouldn't have happened if not for the fact that I started following you because of similar interests in local politics, like not necessarily related to the notion of ADOS. So I think there's a duality to that of like being strategic, but also being very assertive, So.
And what was his name? What was the brother name we just had that meeting with? From Chicago. Walter? Was it Walter?
Marlon.
Marlon. I just met him. Like something Marlon was saying that I really rocked with. Just like you were saying, Kiara, put the information out there. If it clicks, it'll click. Because I know when I was first hearing about this, it was almost instantaneous. I was like, yo, I ain't never heard that before. And then you're intrigued. And then you research, you read, but it's a genuine interest that you have within yourself. So I feel like when I'm in conversations, I'll throw facts out there, I'll say this and say that. And like if someone's engaging, they'll challenge you or they'll ask more questions. And then it kind of builds off of that. But a lot of times what I find out, I could be weird. I think I'm a little eclectic personally. In certain social situations, I'm probably not the best person in that situation. But I do feel like once I put the information out there, most of it is contrary to the popular thought. So when we talk about politics as a community, all we know is Democrat. So when you say something, when I challenge Joe Biden and I call him out for his bullshit, then it's like, yo, you're a Trump supporter. And it's like, whoa, I ain't nobody saying nothing about Trump. But me being critical of the people that's supposed to do for us, a lot of times it'll turn. And I think that's because of, the lack of the political understanding that we have in our community.
So then you're saying we need to be prepared to dispel all the disinformation.
Not even so far that. And again, this may be a cultural thing. I always like to bring up I'm from Louisiana because I feel like we do stuff way different. It's not about dispelling anything. If you want to have a conversation, we can talk. But if you just want to sit up here and say some shit out your mouth just to be talking, I'm not here for that conversation. Either we're going to have an intellectual conversation about a very complex situation, such as politics, or you're going to get on my face. Because a lot of times people just want to argue for the sake of arguing. They don't want to push back for the slack. I don't need to really say much more. There's no real substance there. There's just people spouting opinions. There's no movement. There's no nothing. It's just a bunch of people talking about what's going on. That ain't what I'm here for. I'm about this action. Like, what are we doing? Like, let's set this up. Let's move some stuff. Let's create these paths. Let's get in these streets. Let's do what we got to do. And if it ain't that, I don't want it. Because I don't want nobody, in this ADOS movement with us that ain't about that action. That ain't ready to pull up and drop your phone number and have a conversation. Go meet the governor and have a conversation with Darity and read books and research. If you ain't on it like that, I don't want you. Because this ain't easy. And it's not going to come overnight. And in all actuality, none of us may be here to see this come to fruition. But it's not about that to me. It's about starting a path to help out my kids and my kids' kids' kids and their kids' kids' kids. And I'm dedicated to the fight. I'm dedicated to getting it happen. And I feel like if it's not that, if a person doesn't have that type of mentality, personally, I don't want you on my team. Because we gonna make it happen any way we gotta do it. And if it ain't that, I don't personally want it.
I think with ADOS, we have to remember that each of us here didn't always think the way we thought. We had to be introduced to ADOS data. And while it did click with us, immediately we jumped on board. That's not always the case for everybody. I know, just me personally, association with ADOS has completely stripped me of a lot of the network that I had before I associated with ADOS. I can't conversate with any of those people anymore. Like I came from the world of influencing, travel influencing at that, where we were going on 4 and 5 vacations per year. I can't have that conversation anymore. I can't talk to my former fellow travel influencers about where we're going for vacation. Well, I'm not going on vacations. I really can't afford to go on vacation right now because of COVID, and I'm trying to make sure I have enough money to keep us safe going into whatever is going to come within the next year. But I know that I can't talk to any of my formal travel friends about that. They're still going on vacations. I don't know how, but they're still doing it. They're still traveling. So I lost connection to all of them. And that's what happens when you completely do a 180 turn, is that you do lose that social network. you do lose those connections. You do have family and friends who stop inviting you to stuff. You know, they stop calling you. What's happening now is that we're building new connections. We're building new relationships with each other because we have a like-minded purpose. So I think we have to keep that in mind, that when we share this information, the implications of taking on such an identity are not just as simple as, oh, here's the data, it makes sense, go forth. No, we're asking people to change their lives. It's not easy. So I'll just put that out there.
I agree.
I have a lot of inroads when I put it in context, though. People understand their own plights and their family plights. So I am able to make inroads with people about ADOS and what they're about just from reading the things that are posted from the ADOS members. So I am very optimistic about it. It's just when. I hope I live long enough to see reparations happen, but I know it's going to happen.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is it the communities? Because like when I go home, I have easier conversations at home than I do here. Like I said, y'all are the only people I know in Kansas City and the surrounding areas that won't call it a Russian immigrant or disinformation or propaganda, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Most people that I know here, you know, in the Midwest, here in Kansas City, they really look down on the movement and everything about it. But these are the same type of people. But I also feel like these people, like these are the same people in which you have a $700 to $1,000 student loan payment. You're only making $50,000, $60,000. You drive a really nice car, and you 2 paychecks from being homeless. But instead of being honest about that, you'll try to live this life like, oh, I'm above that. Like, no, you just like them. You ain't no better. You got a degree, but you're not educated. And I don't speak on people's personal, people's personal situations because I don't know, I don't know what you're doing with your money, but I know what the data says.
But lady, what I usually get them with is I point out the fact that we as ADOS, every individual in every generation has to start over with wealth. So despite, I live a decent life. But when I start explaining, like I have a sibling that works for the post office. But when I started to explain to him how he had to establish himself, as well as my sister Alvonia and myself, we did pretty good, but that was only by the grace. That was by our zip code. It was nothing else. So when you start pointing that out to people, they are very receptive to that. And they'll get to thinking about their family members.
Well, see, I'll be honest, and this is just my take. I feel that the people that I converse with on that type of level, because from what I hear, when you speak on what you just spoke on, I hear humility. I know where I came from, and I know a lot of broke people, and I know people who work 2 and 3 and 4 jobs and still ain't got no money. Like, that's where your foundation is based. I don't believe the people that I speak with understand that. I really believe they say, no, I'm it.
What you got to remember, as ADOS, we are stuck in the culture of poverty. A continual cycle of poverty each generation. And what I find with ADOS people is we have internalized a lot of white supremacy, thinking that it's our fault. Now, there is consequence that goes along with actions, but when you, like we are data driven.
Yes.
And you are data driven and you start searching, like looking around for things, you are going to find, like when I started tracing things back to my community, my original community, they started redlining and gentrifying my community in the 60s when my parents bought the house. So when you tell them, look, the fix is in, I know you drive a Benz right now in your 20s, but do you realize in your 60s that number one, A, you may never retire because we are subscribing to this white supremacy. That's including my own parent. I had a parent that died at 59. We have to remind them of the other family members. We are not just one branch, we are a whole tree. So when I start talking about historically how we start over every generation to earn our keep in America, they can relate to that.
I think they, from the conversations I have, and I do feel like 90% of the community that I'm speaking now are all strivers. They're all people that, well, I did what I had to do to get my degree and I'm straight. And I just be looking at you like, you not even straight. You the best of where you come from, and you really ain't no better off than me is. You just don't know it yet. And the only reason I know it is like you said, I know these wealth numbers. I know that the average sister in America with a degree is only worth negative $11,000. You might not know that, and you probably don't even understand the concept of you make $75,000, $80,000 extra, as a salary, but you owe 100 racks. You drive a Benz, but your car note is $600. Your credit score is 535. Like you have these physical things around you, and the perception is that you're doing great. But like y'all spoke of, and I think this is the testament to the conversation. You didn't receive nothing from your parents. Like you didn't receive that, and you're not gonna receive. Understand your white counterparts, your black immigrant counterparts do not share that. Spending their grandparents' money. You spending money you just got from your check yesterday. Like that's totally not the same. And the social indicators, like when we look at the national wealth values, they're attributing down. We're downwardly mobile. Like Tone talks about 60% of all children, 60% of all black children that are born in a middle class home won't be in the middle class by the time they grow up. And it's
But that's when you hit them with, I got friends that own businesses like what I assume to be lucrative businesses, but I hit them with, that money won't sustain your grandkids. Okay, your kids are fine, but your money won't sustain your grandkids. And like my Generation X, we know that. We came out of black middle class. So
I'm millennial, and I understand that, and I came out of Black American middle class too. My mom had a really great government job that she retired from in the early, I think 2009 or 10. So I grew up in the suburbs of Raytown. I went to a relatively good public school system when I was growing up. And even with that, again, this is kind of I'm gonna get really personal because I feel like we need to get personal. So despite me growing up in an upper middle class household where my mother made over six figures in her salary, I came out of high school without a clear plan for how I was going to go to college. Like there was no money set aside for me to go. I ended up having to work my way through. So in that, we have to say like the evidence is there. You may not want to deal with it, but each like Deb said, each generation of Black Americans has to start from the ground up. For the most part, there are outliers who where their parents did save up so much money for them to afford college, or perhaps afford the down payment on the house, or gifted them their wedding, and or whatever else, however else they give those in vitro wealth transfers.
Or for inheriting.
Or for inheritance. But for the most part, each generation of Black Americans is struggling. My mom, when she was getting ready to go to college, she had the same struggle. my grandma was a nurse, and while my mom says that she did make a fair, my grandma was a nurse. My grandpa was a mechanic, and while she says that they did make a decent amount of money, she went into college the same as I went into college, having to work her way through. Why is that? The answer is personal, but it needs to be answered. That question needs to be answered. Why is it that we have parents who did well, but that didn't trickle down to us doing better?
Can I jump on real quick and just say I gotta go, everybody. I'm sorry, but thank you very much for the conversation as always.
Yeah, well, yeah. Thanks, Brian. It's understandable. We're actually, like I said, we're gonna finish up today. So, but thank you for joining in.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.
So I want to speak on it, and I want to first put a disclaimer out there, because whenever, and y'all hear me say this a lot, whenever I'm speaking to y'all about personal situations, I know I have really aggressive personality and I say what I say, but I don't mean to be, you know what I'm saying, picking at people's personal situations. That's very sensitive. So I definitely want to put a disclaimer out there. But, and I want y'all to push back if y'all disagree. But how I understand it, if in Black America, I don't believe you're in the middle class if you can't afford to send your children to college. That's not middle class to me. How I understand it, you may have a lot more money than the average Black family, but you're not middle class, because middle class white people, their kids don't take out financial aid because they real middle class. And when I think about why you don't have anything to pass down to your children, I think of two things. Either you're not handling your finances in the way that you should, or you're not making the money you think you make. Because like a lot of us, and they talk about this something called—
That's not true, baby.
I'm sorry?
That's not true. As Kiara kind of indicated, you know, those government jobs made Black middle class.
Yeah.
I have a family member that works at the post office that brings in $100,000 a year.
Okay,
So I'm saying the middle class does exist, and the middle class has gotten smaller, but we do exist. It may not be on the same level as white people, but when
my definition of middle class is by the standard of what income levels are considered middle class in America.
Okay.
And my mother's fit into upper middle class based on. But that's not based on wealth. That's just based on income. So
That's how I think I'm thinking.
As well as quality of life.
Well, this is my pushback. If I make $100,000 a year and I have $95,000 in bills, I get the income. So income-wise, I'm considered middle class. But I'm just as broke as somebody in the hood, because I ain't got my bills are more than what I'm bringing in. And to me, and like I said, this might be just a me thing, I don't consider that middle class because of the fact.
But young man, Layden, as Americans, most Americans have too much debt.
I don't. Well, and based on the data, how I understand it, like, okay, I heard this comparison once, and I was explaining this to one of the white guys that I work with. Okay, let's just say me and you, Dan, we both make $100,000 a piece. We both making 100 racks at our respective jobs. So let's just say 10,000 of my 100,000 I have to pay back. So I'm already at 90,000. So then let's say I donate another 15,000 to my family, because my family's poor. So now I donate this 15,000. So now I'm at 10 and 15, that's 25. Now I'm at 75,000. Then let's say I'm paying, let's say $10,000 over the course of a year in mortgage payments. So that's take out another 10,000, 65. So compare that to you. If you come from a real middle, what I would consider real middle class, you don't have to send $10,000 home to your mama and your people, because your people got it like that, and they gave you money. In accordance with that, you received an in vivo transfer from your wealthy mother, where she gave you $30,000 to put down on the same home that I bought. But as opposed to spending $10,000 on your mortgage payments that I'm spending, you're only spending about $7,000 because you were able to get a higher interest rate and you were able to put down a bigger down payment on your home. So whereas we make the same amount of money, you make more money than me because I have to pay things that you don't have to pay. And to me,
but now you're going into home ownership, which is a totally different horse, because let's say my house not paid off and yours closer to being paid off, and you have more equity.
That would only happen.
So, lady, you running me down a rabbit hole with all your features. But what I'm saying is, Black middle class does exist, and they are a buffer to us.
Well, I don't feel like it's non-existent.
Hey, I'm with you on the semantics about education, because I got one, but I definitely don't throw that up to nobody. Neither here nor there when you are Black.
Yeah, I agree.
So my thing is, I think somebody referenced people didn't finish high school. I'm gonna post on Twitter today. One of my great grandfathers had a 2nd grade education and had land in Mississippi. So when it comes to us, we cannot apply the same measuring that we apply to white people, because it's not the same. It's like apples and oranges. Because if all of us had to start over to acquire wealth, which we don't have any wealth.
That's why I feel
we are really resilient people.
And agree there, definitely agree there. But I feel as though we have to compare ourselves to white people, because that is the measuring stick. Because if you're white in America, you're normalized. You're regular. And so with us, don't get me wrong, in terms of intellectual ability, and I'm pulling up the 10 minutes to close the racial now. But the point being, it's not a matter of, like, when I think about middle class, I always see it in what at my death, what am I passing down to my kids? Because over my lifetime, if I haven't achieved enough money and enough resources to pass down to my kids, I don't understand how I can consider myself middle class, because I'm in the same position as the lower class, because they ain't passing them down to their kids despite me making more money than they did.
I mean, I'm just gonna jump in and say, and I think the waters are muddy for just that reason, because they do keep us at bottom caste. But I know the Black middle class exists. Honestly, I grew up in it with a whole block and community full of people. And I mean, as far as material things, our parents owned their homes. Our parents were gainfully employed. The civil rights movement for them did what it was supposed to have done. Wealth should have been passed down. Well, it's designed for it not to. But when I look at how much interest rate we pay when we live in urban areas, when I look how they loan money out, we are cut out of that.
And that's what I think the difference is, because I feel as though the class of people that you're talking about, so something Yvette speaks a lot on that I very much agree with, is timing. Because I feel as though, and it's a perfect example, and I need to pull this up, and I'm gonna share my screen so y'all can see this. But timing is what's important, because from what you're explaining to me, what it sounds like, the middle class that you're speaking of, I very much believe that existed at that time. Because coming out of the civil rights era, now you have wealth aggregation. Like, think about it. When y'all was growing up, people could create a career and sustain a career working in factory jobs, when they was building cars,
absolutely.
Like those types of careers existed at that particular point in time. So as my parents were born in 61. So when my parents' generation, they were able to access some of those things.
And Layden, what I'm telling you is that's the generation I'm from.
Well, yeah, and what I'm saying is I'm not in your generation.
When you look at hip hop, when you look at hip hop, that was born out of our struggles, despite us living in a different kind of America.
In 75, this is when hip hop started.
I mean, okay, it didn't get popular to closer to the late 70s, but we'll split hairs on that. But number one, what I'm saying, everything in America and our culture came out of our oppression, period. Whether it's entertainment, whatever it is.
Yes.
I mean, when we start tracing our lineage, I came from a midwife.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother delivered her, and she was a known midwife.
Well,
So what I'm saying is, no, we don't get paid for anything. But that Black middle class exists. And that's why we got the Don Lemons that's anchoring himself by his sexuality and not necessarily by his ethnicity.
Mm-hmm.
So they exist and they are a buffer class. You can see the buffer class in law enforcement.
I think what I'm starting to notice.
Oh, Layton, hold on. I'm gonna just so we can be clear in talking about the information that we need to share within the Black community to get our people on board. We have now moved on to the differences between Black middle class and white middle class, right?
Well, I don't understand why those things are separate. Because to me, it's middle class America. Either you in it or you ain't. Now, if we're comparing white America to Black America.
Well, yeah, because you were saying that white middle class has the buffer of wealthy upper middle class parents. Black middle, and when I say middle class again, I'm talking about income level.
See, I don't think that's the conversation I'm having. That's why I think.
So yeah. So when I say middle class, I'm talking about your income level.
Okay.
I'm not talking about your wealth.
And are we putting that income level in context to all incomes in America, or are we putting that income level in context to Black America? Because I'm not speaking about middle class for Black America. I'm only talking about America. The reason being, if you're in the middle class for Black America, you can still be really poor in America.
Yeah, that's why I'm making the distinction. Just that right there. You can have a white person and a Black person making $75,000 to $100,000 a year, but the difference between them is, thank you, Lily. The difference between them is that the Black person comes with the oppression of systematic racism, of having the college debt, of not being able to afford a house in the neighborhood where they want. They're redlined. A white person doesn't have that. So that's the difference between Black middle class and white middle class, and that's the information that we need to share.
So my question with that is, if I'm in a Black middle class and I can't afford to live in a white middle class neighborhood, I don't see how I'm middle class, because I live in America, and America has a certain standard. And I'm about to show y'all. I'm about to pull this up because this is something that Tone put up. This was a while back. Basically what he did is he took. So okay, when we think about middle class America, we think about, sending your kids to college. We think about saving for retirement, home ownership, maybe rental property or something to that effect. Is what I think about when I think about middle class. All right, favorites. I'm gonna share my screen.
Okay. I think I just changed the settings so you can share.
Oh, y'all let me know if y'all can see. Let me see. Screen 2. Oh, snap. Are y'all able to see that? Can y'all see my screen?
Yeah, I see it.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a graphic that Tone put together.
You want to take my car?
This is a that's all put together. And basically what it details is if you're average in America, your net worth at $110,000, this is what you can afford. Now we know that the top 5% of all African Americans in America are only worth $350,000 living. I mean total, like whole net worth. So for $350,000, that don't even put you in the good category because the good is $500,000 and more. And based on that $500,000, you can afford to go somewhere like, University of Georgia, which is a decent, college institution. You can pay off your student loans and you can retire. Is what you can do if you're making in excess of $500,000. So this, I'll go back to this one, which is details ADOS America. This is where we sit. This is what we can afford. Based on the Federal Reserve numbers on black wealth in America. We don't have anybody of worth mentioning in the $6 million range. And I'll bring up another graphic to show you side by side what's what. Oh, see, I'll leave this here. Go here. Give me just a second. And so when we're discussing middle class, and like I said, I think me and Deb on what she's talking about, I just don't think I'm talking about her generation. I think I'm more so thinking about, like you were saying, like the millennial generation. Because all of the people that I know that came from, those like middle class areas, I don't see them living the middle class life that they were raised in majority of the time. In just a second, I can pull this up. Oh, okay. So this is a breakdown. This is a breakdown of all of Black America, what their income ratios are. If you see, the bulk of our income ratio is at $12,000 to $37,000, and that's 40% of all Black America. Now, this does include immigrants. This doesn't differentiate between ADOS and immigrants. The bulk of Black America only makes $40,000. Oh, yes, below $40,000. So when we start looking at upwards of income, those numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So when I say there's not a Black middle class, what I'm saying is this is Black income. And for, just for, what do they call it, reference purposes, the chart says 2010 to 2012. That was 8 years ago. The reason there's not an updated chart.
You going in and out, language. You going in and out. You cutting off. I can't hear everything you saying.
Okay. So the bulk of us are at 40,000. When we look at what it takes to be middle class, I make reference to the chart on the right. So what I consider middle class is the good and the elite section on the graph on the right. Because that's what I consider middle class. You can pay off your student loans, you can retire, you go to a good university to get an education and you can pay that off. That to me is what I consider middle class, as well as, elite I would consider upper middle class. But when I look at 1 to 2 million in net worth, that's not gonna come from making $40,000. Like when I look at what it takes to have a net worth of 500,000 or more, when I look at, the income ratio, you could be worth 500,000 making, I don't know, between 112,000 and 137,000, in income if you budget right. But when we look at those numbers, that's only 2% of Black America. You know what I'm saying? So how can we have a middle class when if you look upwards of that particular area that I just named, I don't know that we even have 1% of Black America even making that type of income in order to provide what I consider a middle class life. Like, yeah, you can live in a nice neighborhood and, own a home and have a business, et cetera. But looking at the chart on the right, like we know it's something we won't argue, the top 5% of all Black America is only worth $350,000. But here we're looking at it, in order to be middle class in America, you need to be upwards of $500,000. And that's just based on, groceries, and this is a national list. So I just wanted to point out, like I said, because I'm cool with the disagreements, but I do feel like we have to consider, the chart on the left in terms of income, which is
And then you also have to consider you kind of confining yourself to right now, because like in my 20s I worked at Chrysler, and not only did we have Chrysler here, we had GM and we had Ford. So what I'm saying is, what we talking about, it's a lot of laws and policies that have been put in place by different presidents since I was in black class and since you've been born.
I agree. But see, and that's what I'm speaking to. Because what I'm speaking to, when you bring up the Chryslers and the Fords and the GMs, those cars don't exist here anymore.
But it's still people. But what I'm saying is that black middle class may come from people that went to the military and ended up in government jobs after the fact and make $100,000 a year, like one of my siblings. So that means eventually in their lifetime they did make $1 million.
Right.
What
we're saying, what we're saying is that a black middle class and even a black elite class does exist. It is not comparable to a white middle or upper class.
And I agree, but they still exist.
Yes.
And that's why they are a buffer. But I'm saying at different times in different times in America, we was making the money. As a graduate student, I worked part-time at Chrysler, and those people, even though they worked overtime, they brought home over $100,000 a year. Times have changed.
And I think that's what I'm speaking.
That's true.
You talk about those people that made those $100,000 and may have earned, upwards of $1 million.
What I'm saying is, America has changed for your generation.
I
was old enough to see what I assume to be black middle class. I mean, even though me myself, I'm the first generation off a plantation, to be honest. My dad was born on a plantation.
Oh, no. My father wasn't. My bad. I'm true.
I'm saying my father was.
Okay.
I mean, so like when you bring up your mom born in 61, I was born in 70. So I'm saying, talk to your mom. We had institutions where I was from where they were icons. Even though, no, we can't compare white society to black society because it's designed that way.
Yeah.
But for us as individuals to each have to start over.
Yeah. But that's what I think that's the point that I'm making is I feel that those institutions were created with your generation. But when I came up, I couldn't take advantage of none of that because it didn't exist.
No, that was my parents' generation. That wasn't my generation. We was totally if you could be entitled as a black person, we was pretty much entitled. I mean, we never had to depend on government assistance. My family didn't. We owned our house. I mean, I didn't know any different. If the internet was not around, I would just be on with my little life and think any L I took was my L. Because I honestly was able to subscribe to my parents. They came from the great generation or the best generation. Just go to school. They can't take your education from you.
Well, this is the issue with education, and I think this is what this chart shows. That education, when they were coming up and when you were coming up, there was a job associated with that education. So it's the plugs and outlets. You get the degree, you can access the wealth because there's a job to access the wealth. For my generation,
no, not necessarily. With the jobs, that's ran by systemic racism. So when
but you have a better chance to access it. I agree with what you're saying, but
I mean, even with the education, discriminatory practices happen all the time.
I agree.
I mean, the game is just not for us to be successful, and it's definitely for us to individualize it when it's us collectively that has been oppressed. Now, if you ask me, do I personally feel oppressed. It has been times I worked in proprietary education, and I was wondering, it was maybe 2 ADOS there and 2 people from the diaspora. I didn't know the difference.
Well,
What I'm saying is, games with us because they can. I wasn't aware of that until I got familiar with ADOS and started reading the literature that they put out. So, I mean, I agree with you with our middle class has never been comparable in no way to white middle class, but we got some top of the bottom people in our ethnicity that think that because of the effort that they did, that they are okay. But what I try to redirect them to, your grandkids may not be. I live next door to a baby boomer whom was a school teacher, and her husband worked as a supervisor at Chrysler with me. He was over everybody. Right now, she got her kids at home. I mean, they play a lot of games with us.
I got
even
a
when we
question.
get older.
So do we, like when we think about the middle class, like, cause okay, I'll explain the chart first. So based on the chart, so that chart is all black wealth in America. I don't know, can you see that? I don't know if that's still up there. So the 100th percentile is the baby boomer generation that you're speaking of. So when they were coming up, they were able to accrue wealth based on the way the laws were and the way jobs were, et cetera, et cetera. I think Kiara and my generation are between the 40s and maybe the 70s. The best. So what we found out was we can't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Well, you got to remember with y'all, anything that happened after, I say, 1980, after Carter left, that's why I really got hooked up with following ADOS. Because, I mean, how can I put it? Not only does every generation has to earn their own keep, but that crack stuff, to be alive during the crack generation, it was like being alive in the Twilight Zone.
Well, to explain
They
that,
put that in
my generation are the crack babies.
So I look at,
No,
yeah,
I
I
think
look at you guys as being perpetually
we might.
abused.
This is getting to be a little bit more of a like separate conversation that we might
I'm
need to
sorry,
have.
I'm a social worker. All I know is what I see every day.
No, I definitely think we need to have this conversation, but we're supposed to be talking about what we need to do as far as getting people on board with ADOS in order to get the push we need for Congress. So that, yeah. All right. Bye, Chris. We will see you next week. So I think we might have to like pin that for we'll get back to that next week. But for now, let's just end this conversation at we definitely need to be sharing all this information with our people, friends, family. We need to hit them with the data. We definitely need to share our personal experiences of what it means to be ADOS and giving them that information as well and helping them see, you say you're this, but here's the information. Here's the income levels that they say is middle class. Here's how white America is when they're middle class, like all that. So all of that needs to be shared in order to get people to a place where the information makes sense to them. Okay, so we'll touch some more on that next week. The last discussion we're gonna get into today is how much should a reparations agenda be? How much? Hi, Dev. So I was like, hey, Deb. Okay. So again, how much should be included in an agenda and what specific policies should be in it? So we'll, and in this instance, when we answer, we'll just go around. If you're able to reference the book, that would be great because there are several examples of economists in the book that each gave an amount for what a reparation agenda should be and how much should be distributed to each individual Black American. So we'll talk about that, talk about which of those you agree with, and then talk about what specific policies that you think we need to have. Okay. We're talking about the amount for reparations and what policies should be included. And who wants to go first?
Real quick, I'll say 20 trillion, and probably the most detailed policies that I've seen are the ones we have on our Black agenda. Like if you go to the Black agenda on the ADOS101.com site, I would say those. I think those are all encompassing. You know, it's everything from jobs guarantees to police reform to, you know, cash payments to, and I think it does detail in there that it would be a multi-generational policy. So this will go on for, you know, years and years to come. But from what I've seen, and I'll be totally honest with y'all, I'm going with the highest estimate. Whatever the most money, I'm probably with that one. But I like the way they have it broke down in terms of the different policies. And I don't think that I've seen a more complete list of policies than what's mentioned on our website.
I'll jump in. So the calculations that I agreed with were, I'll say this. Okay. So in From Here to Equality, Darity and Mullen said that there are several strategies that have been advanced for calculating the monetary value of a reparations bill. They employed 3 interest rates, 4%, 5%, and 6%, to accommodate the varying measures of rates of return. The one I agreed with is from Thomas Kramer, and I'll read this part. It says, Thomas Kramer has generated a provocative set of estimates of the slavery bill for Black reparations by multiplying the prevailing average market wage by the number of hours worked by those enslaved over the interval of 1776 to 1865. Kramer assumes that each full 24-hour day was stolen from the enslaved. Using a 3% interest rate, by 2015, he estimates the value of chattel labor would have been 14.2 trillion. Using his interest rate, the 2019 value would have been 15.7 trillion. At each of the interest rates, the current values would have been 4% at a rate of 16.4 trillion, 17 trillion at 5%, and 6% at 17.7 trillion. The reason why I agree with that is because all the other examples that were outlined in this chapter did not include the beginning of when America became a country in 1776. And they did not go all the way until when slavery was officially ended in 1865. His did. And also some of the other ones took away the maintenance as so the cost of housing, the cost of food, the cost of clothing. And I think it is really, it's just plain wrong to say to the descendants of slavery that part of your ancestors' reparations was the fact that their slave owners fed them. Like that's messed up. So his did not discount the those provisions that were put in place. His states that the full 24-hour day was stolen, and in that we say we value our time as well as our efforts, services that we provided. So I like that his does that. Some measures that I think need to be included. Oh, hold on. Do we want to jump in now, or? Okay, so I would say the second part of my question, or the second part of my answer will be, I think that we need to include policies that remove the effects of all the ways Black Americans are oppressed now. That's in workplace discrimination, housing discrimination, police brutality, the fact that we are redlined in certain areas, the effects of anti-ADOS rhetoric. So we need solutions that protect us from having the effects of those. And I am done. I think, I'm not sure who raised their hand first. We'll go with Miss Alvonia and then Layton.
Wait. You muted.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add in the fact that he did comment and say that all of them were inadequate because they didn't take into effect the physical and emotional harms of slavery and how we were all coerced.
Yeah.
I think it should be a combination of Kramers plus the land that they did not give us. That's all I have. They need to take, again, like you said, Kiara and Layton, they need to develop a plan that includes all of the above, to be honest, because the harms done have been so great and it's ongoing.
Yeah. And that was the point I was gonna make. Like, cause when I'm listening to how it's added up, I think about like in a car wreck, right? You driving a car, you get in a car accident, it wasn't your fault, they total out your car, you don't have to pay insurance, they get you a new car on top of paying you for pain and suffering, that everything you had to go through, they also pay you for lost wages. And if we going from 1776 to 1863, I would make it a hard point, like a hard point. If I was free in 63, then Juneteenth would have never existed. And if I was free in 63, then there would be no such thing as a Civil Rights Act. And if I was free in 63, then there would be no need for reparations because I had everything that I needed back then. So you got to pay me for them black codes and convict leasing and redlining and pain and suffering for all of that too. So we was looking at, what was that you said, 17 trillion? I think we can stretch another 10 trillion out of pain and suffering. And then we have to think about how, like something that comes to mind, the Red Summer of 1919. When you just had white people going crazy, killing niggas everywhere. Like, I'm gonna just take your land, I'm gonna murder your people. I need to get that too. I also need to get paid and compensated for the fact that we weren't able to take count in the Homestead Act when we were buying homes. We weren't allowed to purchase homes. We weren't allowed to get Federal Housing Administration loans, FHA loans, to buy homes. Also, with the constant decline of our wealth and our equity in our communities due to redlining and things such as that, we need to be compensated for that, as well as the pain and suffering for that. I also think we should be compensated for the pain and suffering we receive from police brutality. And like, it goes on. I also think that we should be compensated for the fact that there are studies that have shown that if you look at a black person with a given amount of qualifications and a white person with a given amount of qualifications, for the same job, the white person gets paid an extra $5,000 as compared to that black person. And over the course of their career, they get paid an extra $2 or $3 million. And that's just talking about white men to black men. That aspect is even greater when you're comparing white men to black women. And so we need to get paid and suffering for that as well. And I can go on and on with this stuff pretty much because, like, I feel like there's a lot we have to incorporate into it because this didn't end in 1863. And to say that, okay, we'll pay you for slavery, okay, well, that's slavery. But slavery isn't the only thing to me that reparations is repairing. It's been the oppression of my people from, and I like to say 1619, but we don't have the data to support that, but from 1776 until 2020. Because on top of the slavery, on top of the Jim Crow, the peonage, the redlining, the sharecropping, on and on and on top of that, once we get past that, we come into the late 80s or the early 80s, and so forth, you still have job discrimination. You still have, the mistreatment of black people. You still have people that were denied jobs because of their hair and how they look. And I very well feel like that should be incorporated as well because we are affected by that as well up until this current time. And I feel like we should be at an advantage for at least at minimum the next 400 years. We should be at an advantage because we incurred that disadvantage for that long as well. That was long-winded. I apologize.
All right, Deb, do you wanna share some your input on what you think the cost or the provision should be?
Hey, look, hey, I'm on board. I just want to see us collectively. I would like to see us move to a special class. I'm open on like the education part. I do believe we deserve cash payments as well, but I like the fact that ADOS specifies that this is seed money for future generations. So I'm kind of liberal on what it looks like. I just know that they need to do something for us because the average ADOS, we dying. I think we ought to get pandemic payments, but that hasn't worked out yet. So I'm just worried. I can see us becoming extinct, as human beings. So I'm just worried. I'm on board with everything.
All right, so let me exit full screen. So something that I did want to touch on is that in the book it states the ultimate goals or the ultimate aim should be to eliminate the racial wealth gap within 1 decade or within 10 years. And I definitely that's a point I definitely agree with, that we should not have too prolonged of a reparations or we should not waste too much time in implementing the program. I know some of the economists say it would take 20 years. I agree that it should be 10 years or less. Let me find the point that was made about the racial wealth gap. Let me see if I can find it.
I got it. It's page 263.
I think I found it.
Is
Okay,
that what you're talking
so after each of the economists, their plans were laid out. Darity and Mullen say that none of those would be enough to close the wealth gap. So then they proposed, I'm trying to see, they proposed a plan that would, and I'm trying to find it because the way they calculated was interesting. Oh, my eyes aren't finding it. Just a moment. Oh, okay, got it. So here it says that another route for arriving at a similar estimate of the magnitude of a reparations bill that centers on eliminating the racial wealth gap is to calculate the amount needed to give eligible Black Americans a share of the nation's wealth, comparable to their share in the nation's population. Our population constitutes about 13% of America, and the nation's total wealth is or has reached or did reach 107 trillion by the second quarter of 2018. 13% of that would be almost 14 trillion, 13.91 trillion to be exact, but I'm going to round up to say 14 trillion. And it says, if as upper bound, Black Americans hold 3% of the wealth, that amounts to 3.21 trillion. And to eliminate the difference would require reparations of 10.7 trillion, which is about an average of 267,000 per eligible Black American, which is 40 million. In the book, it says 40 million are eligible. I just wanted to point this out because I disagree with that figure of only 267,000, and that's because when you're calculating that figure, and it takes into account the Black Americans that already have wealth, and they count that figure against the remaining balance, not all of Black America is wealthy. So if that makes sense. So the fact that it's let me go back. So the fact that it's only considering the closure of the wealth gap net needed is 10 trillion, because some Black Americans have 3 trillion. I don't think that's right. We need to consider closing the wealth gap and addressing all the issues that we've already been talking about. So that figure, the amount that goes to each individual should be much higher. I'd say at least 500,000 per person. And depending on how we calculate the population of Black Americans, I believe if the figure is anywhere between 15 and 20 trillion, that amount per person would be between 500,000 and 750,000 per Black American. And I think that's much closer to the figure we should be at. And I'll stop.
So I guess a question that I posed to the group, because based on the way they explained it, because I disagree as well, but based on the way they explained it, they're taking all of America's wealth and they say, okay, you 13% of the population, you deserve 13% of the wealth. But I look at it as, I just need you to pay me what I worked for and pay me generally the interest that I would have gained, because it's my belief that I'm not asking you to give me my fair share in terms of my fair share percent of the population. No, pay me what I work for, because that's what I'm asking. Now, it's not my fault that what I work for is way more than what 13% of 100,000. Let's just say it's $100,000 total wealth, so that'll be like $100 trillion. So we'll have 13 trillion. We're looking at, I think we have to understand American history and understand that before 1863, we were the most expensive thing in America. All of the railroads, the stock market, everything that's everything, we were more than all of that. So that's the money I need. Not the money that you done made and incurred. Not all the money that we had. Now pay me what I was due back then. And then like Derek speaks about the formula was talking.
With the 6% interest.
You damn right. You damn right. Because that's what I would have made. And we have to look at it, and I would look at it similarly in the ways that they looked at it for the descendants of the Jewish Americans. I want the same thing they got. The difference between me and them, I was worth way more money than me. Because I'm the reason America is America. Don't just give me my fair share of population. Let me tell you, I need to get that too. So I want that, and I want what I was worth. And I want some pain and suffering if we just gonna be all the way honest about it. But I think we have to be very vigilant. Because what I don't want to happen, and that I see happening, I see us getting to a point where they say they're going to give us this, y'all, let's just go and get this. No, we can't do it that way. We can't do it, I can't. Because no, pay me what I'm due. Because I'm not asking for you to do nothing more for Black America than you've done for Japanese descendants of the internment camps, that you did for Jewish descendants, that you did for the people that you paid. I want the same scale. It just so happened what I do is way more than what they do. But we're going to use the same rubric because there is no more person that has sacrificed more in America than ADOS. That's facts.
All right, go ahead, Miss Al.
Yeah, thank you. Layton, that was on point. And I just want to bring up, did anyone see the article where they said that they're going to send the Holocaust survivors more money to survive on during the pandemic? Did you guys also see that? Yeah, that's the only comment.
That the United States is going to do that?
No. The ones that pay the Holocaust survivors, they're going to send them. They put so many millions of dollars out there for the Holocaust survivors. I can't remember. I want to say it was 400 million. They're going to send out to Holocaust survivors. It was an article I think I read maybe a couple days ago. It just came to mind when Layton was speaking. That's all. That's the point I wanted to make.
Well, I think that makes a very good point as far as ADOS reparations should be concerned, because we do want to be clear that this is just not a one-time initiative, a one-time payment, that it's ongoing, and that the effects of it should be for multiple generations into the future. And that if ever necessary, that Congress should go back to the drawing board and say, okay, this part of the plan is working, this part of the plan is not, we need to change this, we need to add this, it turns out we also need to do this. So you're right. I think we should also look at it as the long term, that we need to be prepared that the policies could change over time, and that they should change over time as Black America starts getting the payments and the policies, as we start adjusting to life with full citizenship and what that means for us.
I agree.
Sorry, she's making a lot of noise. I'm trying to get her to be quiet. So what is
Let Lily be great. Let Lily be great. She's not bothering us.
She's making a lot of noise.
Nah, let her be great.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So I think we are all in agreement that the figure should be at least 15 to 20 trillion. In policies should also include what is necessary to elevate us to a protected class. Okay, and those specific policies will be a redress for slavery, Jim Crow, Black codes, mass incarceration, housing discrimination.
Redlining.
Well, I kind of include that in the housing discrimination because it kept us from getting houses in certain neighborhoods, and also the effects of school of discrimination in education.
But you
Yes.
also have to include, so if you were in these red line areas, in addition to not being able to get homes there, you were discriminated against the type of loans that you apply for, whether it be in business or whether it be home loans or whether it be personal loans. So we have to include that too.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. All right, so we are agreement there. Does anyone so what is the population of Black America? Because sometimes I hear figures of 35 million. The book says 40 million. Should we just go with the 40 million? We're just going to go with the 40 million just because that's what the figure in the book. Okay, so I'm going to pause. Well, I'm not going to pause. I'm going to open up calculator. Actually, I'm going to use the calculator on my phone. Figure it out. So, give me a moment. So 40 million. No, sorry. We'll say 20 trillion divided by 40 million is 500,000 per Black American. So, and that's just the monetary amount. So with that, maybe we can all agree that the actual implementation of the program will cost far more than that. Probably 2 or 3 times as much. 40 to 60 trillion.
I would push back on the 40 million because how I understand it is 42 million. I think it's 42 million Black people, but 10 of those are African immigrants. Is how I understand it. But I will go back and verify those numbers.
That's the part. That's where I'm kind of confused too, because some say that the population of actually Black ADOS Americans is 32 to 35 million. The book says 40 million. So I've never quite, every time I look at it, I get a different figure based on whatever source I go to.
So Google search puts us right now, or 2019, they put us at 42 million Black people.
And we know there's 10. Are there 10 million Black immigrants in America that's included in that figure?
Yes, because think about it. There's no differentiation between a Black immigrant. Like, there's no differentiation between Black and an Ethiopian. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Black, based on the census, I would say. And I think it breaks down further than that once you declare Black as of African, because we're of African descent. So I think that's how it's worded. But when you go and do the and I forget how they go about proving it, but I think they look at how they mark certain things or whether they declare themselves as a Ghanaian.
Okay. Well, just for simplification, we'll say that the population of Black ADOS is 35 million.
Yeah, I think that'll be better.
So then that figure, if we each get 500,000, that figure is around 15 to 17 trillion, right? So the actual implementation of a reparations program, including the monetary distribution of funds, plus the policies, plus whatever costs are incurred for the committee that is over the agenda, would be much more than that, probably 2 or 3 times as much, upwards of 30 to 60 trillion. And I think Alvonia had her hand. You want to jump in?
Whoa. You muted.
I was just agreeing. I'm fine. No, I was just agreeing.
I'll say that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge figure, but
No, it's not.
oh, and you guys remember that? You remember? Does anyone remember that article that said racism in America has cost the nation 16 trillion? But my confusion on that end is, like, the article said that it was within a span of 20 years that racism cost the nation 16 trillion. So I'm thinking, well, if the nation lost 16 trillion for its anti-ADOS policies in 20 years, how much more has been lost in the 400 plus years?
I don't know if I saw that article, but
but
I
does
saw
it?
a gentleman that does the stock market. Someone
I'll
shared
find it.
Did you see it? Did you see the gentleman that does the I think the Fox News stock market talked how much talked about how us being left out of society economically cost America so many trillions of dollars.
Yeah, let me see if I can find the article and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, if I find the video, sorry, yeah, put it in the chat as well.
I can't hear anybody.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
I was just saying that I did put the article in the chat, and that I thought it was interesting that it says that America lost out on 16 trillion in a span of just 20 years. When that's around the figure of what the payments to ADOS would be. Now that doesn't, of course, now that we're getting into the nitty-gritty of it, we can all agree that that's just the amount that we should get in cash payments. that's not the cost of what a full reparations agenda would cost the nation. That's just a portion of the cost. But so we can end for today on that note. I think we've discussed who qualifies for reparations. We've talked about who should pay for a reparations agenda. We've talked about what should be in a reparations agenda. And I think that's it for today. So I want to thank you all for hanging in here on a Saturday. And if you're watching, thank you so much. If you haven't already, please like this video. Please subscribe to our channel. Please, please, please share this information with your people. We've been talking about sharing the data, getting people on board, and we all have to do our part. We expect you to do your part too. So we appreciate you all in the chat. Ms. Deb, Sylvania, Layton, Chris, Brian, thank you so much. And we will see you all next week. Bye-bye.